I hereby call this Planning and Community Affairs Committee meeting to order, held Monday, March 19th at 6:30 p.m. I'd like to ask everyone to please rise for a moment of silence. Please be seated. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and nature thereof. Right. I myself have a pecuniary interest on COMS 2018-024 and the presentation 10.1 from Sierra Planning on the analysis of an indoor pool because there's reference to the Stockworth development, which is directly across the street from where I live. So when we are dealing with the presentation and the staff report, I will relinquish the chair to Councillor Guido, and I will not be discussing or voting on the matter. Any other pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to announcements from Council. Councillor Guido.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a reminder that this year, as an annual tradition, the Port Perry Easter Bonnet Contest is being put on by the Port Perry United Church Chicks. Sunday, April 1st at noon in front of the post office on Queen Street. 100% of the money collected goes back to the Scugog Memorial Library, specifically to the children and teen section. They have added a new category this year, Most Foolish. It is such a fantastic community event, and we're hoping that everyone comes out and enjoys the day. There's also a petting zoo there, so there's something for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other announcements from Council? Councillor Watton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to remind everyone of the Awards of Excellence and the AGM for the Chamber on March 21st from 7 to 9. The guest speaker is Matt Anderson, President of Lakeridge Health. Tickets are $40 for members and $45 for non-members. And also the Home and Garden Show is being hosted at the Community Center April 14th and 15th. And one final announcement that the Rotary Gala is on April 21st with cocktails at 5:30, dinner at 7. Tickets are $125 each, and all proceeds will go to the Port Perry Hospice. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Any other announcements from Council? Seeing none, announcements from staff? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 8.1, adoption of the minutes, moved by Councillor Drew, seconded by Councillor Watton. Any errors, omissions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next item is 9.1, which is this portion of the meeting has been set aside for a statutory public information meeting held under Section 36 of the Planning Act for zoning bylaw amendment application Z11-2017 submitted by Valerie Cranmer, agent on behalf of Donna Schwaben Park for 18 blocks of properties located at Part Lot 18, Concession 5, Cadmus in Ward 4. Public notice was provided to the Condominium Corporation, DS Park, Valerie Cranmer, agent, and the required public agencies by the Township of Scugog in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. Director Heritage, on behalf of the Planning Technician, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the committee. Now, the subject lands include 18 blocks within the Register Plans of Subdivision and Condominium of Donna Schwaben Park, Walton, Inc., known locally as DS Park. DS Park is located within an existing residential cluster east of the hamlet of Blackstock. The total land holdings include 125 residential parcels, a private road system, together with significant wetland and forest features. Now, the purpose of the application is to rezone specific parcels by removing the holding symbol to enable these 18 blocks to be separately conveyed. DS Park contains several different zoning categories: rural residential exception 1 with and without holding symbols, and recreation and environmental protection zones. Residential uses are only permitted in the rural residential exception 1 zones. Now, 14 of the 18 blocks contain existing single-detached dwellings serviced by approved private wells and wastewater systems. The remaining 4 blocks are considered vacant land and meet the region's requirements for private servicing. The township originally applied the holding symbol to many parcels within DS Park to ensure that each lot and block within the plan met the requirements of the Regional Health Department relating to private servicing and Kawartha Conservation relating to drainage and stormwater management. These are conditions of approval that are contained within the subdivision agreement. Now, staff have undertaken a detailed analysis of the planning policy considerations associated with the application. This review has confirmed that the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and the Greenbelt Plan and conforms to both the regional and township official plans. The application was also reviewed by external agencies and municipal departments, and no objection or concerns were identified. The content of staff's report is intended to provide sufficient information for council to make a decision on this rezoning application this evening. Unlike other rezoning applications in this case, it is only the applicant or their agent who can appeal the non-removal of a holding symbol to the Ontario Municipal Board. This is the 5th application submitted by DS Park to remove the holding symbol from a total of 55 blocks since the subdivision and condominium plans were approved in 2012. It is staff's opinion that the rezoning application conforms with all applicable planning policy documents, and staff is recommending that the draft zoning bylaw amendment appended as attachment 2 to this report be forwarded to council for approval on March 26, 2018, at council's next regular meeting. Mr. Mayor, this concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you or the committee may have.
Thank you very much for the report. Any questions from council? Okay. Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When was the first lot put in this subdivision?
Ms. Cranmer, do you know when the first lot in DS Park was part of the subdivision? Just maybe push to the microphone for the benefit of the recording. If you could just have a seat. Sure. You're welcome to sit.
The first lot was put in once the plan of subdivision and plan of vacant land condominium was approved. So it was about 5 years ago that the first group of lots came forward to council for removing the H.
And they are 1 acre lots.
Yes.
I know the health department approved it. They had no objections or concerns. But I'm concerned, and I'm actually concerned with even the 5-year-old ones, whether they're large enough for sewage saturation. Do you know how big do they have to be for sewage saturation before they start to contaminate the wells? The region and the township has been very careful to try and ensure that there would be no contamination of any of the wells. When we first started the process, there were a lot of dug wells on the property, and all of those have been decommissioned as required by the health department and the Conservation Authority. There's sufficient land around where the wells are located and the septics that the health department is not concerned about any contamination of the wells. So are they now drilled wells?
They are all drilled wells, and they are all required to go into a certain part of the aquifer as well.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from council? You might as well stick around, Hillary, because in the next part, any questions on behalf of, or do you want to add anything on behalf of your client at this time?
We are just pleased to see it come forward. A large number of lots, this time 18. But all of them do meet the requirements of the Health Department and the Conservation Authority. And, with passing of the zoning bylaw at your next council meeting, that will then allow them to come forward and improve the buildings that are on there or put new ones on.
There's one more coming forward, and they promised me that's the end, of about 6 more lots, maybe next year.
Is that the end of?
And that's the end.
But does that mean all of them have been converted?
That's all of the ones that have the H on
Right.
them. Now, there may be some that want to come and try to do something different, but under this process that you've been so kind to give us, DS Park, for having the public meeting and the recommendation meeting at the same time, it's only this next time, when there's about 6 lots, that'll be the last.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions from council for Ms. Cranmer? Seeing none. So, are there any members of the public who wish to speak to the application? If so, proceed to the microphone and state your name and municipal address for the record. All right. Last call. All right. Are there any for final questions from council at this time? Okay. Seeing none. Thank you for those of you attending to provide your input into the statutory public information meeting, and this concludes this statutory public information meeting. I would like to bring forward 9.1 now, the report, which is 11.1. Moved by Councillor Back, seconded by Councillor Drew. The recommendation here, are there any questions from council on that? Right, seeing none. All those in favor? Carried. Dealt with. Thank you very much. Next item is 9.2 zoning bylaw amendment application, which is our second public meeting for the evening. So this portion of the meeting has been set aside for the statutory public information meeting being held under Section 34 of the Planning Act for the zoning bylaw amendment application Z13-2017 submitted by Tammy Finlay for the property located at 980 Scugog Line 14. It is important that the public express their views either in person or in writing prior to decisions being made by this council. If you wish to file an appeal of council's decision to the Ontario Municipal Board, you must first speak to the matter at this public meeting or provide a written submission before a zoning bylaw amendment is passed. If you do not, you will not be added as a party to the hearing by the OMB unless the board determines there are reasonable grounds to do so. Public notice was served by the Township of Scugog in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. So, Mr. Rob Bertoli, please proceed with your presentation at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of committee. As mentioned, we are here to discuss the zoning bylaw amendment application Z13-2017. This is the statutory public information meeting portion of the planning process. This is the portion where the public is provided the opportunity to comment on the proposal. As you're aware, no decisions are made at this time, but the feedback received will inform staff recommendation report back to council. The required public notice was provided to all property owners within 400 feet. The posted on the township's website, as well as a sign had also been placed on the property to notify the public of the application. A report was provided to council last week for your review, but I will just touch upon a few of the main points. The applicant owns the property of 980 Scugog Line 14. They are proposing to install a 99 square meter garden suite, which will provide independent living accommodations for the applicant's parents. This will ensure that the family members can reside on the property in close proximity to the existing family while still maintaining some manner of independence. As outlined by the report, the township's official plan permits garden suites in all designations that permit residential uses, which is the case here. Currently, under the township zoning bylaw 1414 document, no zone permits a garden suite without an amendment. When permitted, our zoning bylaw allows for a structure of up to 60 square meters in this regard. To this end, the applicant is requesting to rezone a portion of the subject lands to recognize the garden suite as a permitted use, as well as increase the maximum allowable size of garden suite permitted. As per the Planning Act, the applicant is requesting the provision of this temporary use for a period of not exceeding 20 years. Council may grant further periods of or extensions of not more than 3 years at a time during the period in which the temporary use is authorized. So I guess just to reiterate here, the applicant is proposing to install a 99 square meter garden suite to allow their parents to live on site. As mentioned, a garden suite is not a permitted use within any zone without a rezoning. Our zoning bylaw allows for a 60 meter square structure. A rezoning is therefore required to permit the proposed use as well as permit the size. The property in question is over 25 acres. Even with the enlarged 99 square meter structure, the garden suite only represents a 0.1% lot coverage on the property. The proposal meets all other standards and regulations established by zoning bylaw 1414. The application was circled to external agencies as well as internal departments with no objections or no major objections or concerns being noted. Any comments received tonight or subsequently written comments will be considered by staff in the future as it pertains to the recommendation report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you or council may have.
Thank you very much for that report, Mr. Bertoli. Any questions from council? Councilor Somerville?
Just a quick question, and I think I've asked this question in the past. It's approved not to exceed 20 years. What does it say here? Yeah, a temporary use not to exceed 20 years. Who follows up on this in 20 years?
So it's my understanding that we would have the applicant enter into a what's called a garden suite agreement, which would outline the conditions of this agreement, of this rezoning application.
So, again, I asked you,
Yeah.
who follows this up?
Well, in order for the applicant to, I guess, receive their securities, as part of the conditions of those being released, would be the evidence of termination of the garden suite.
I'm sorry. Can you speak up?
So as part of, here we go.
That's better.
As part of the garden suite agreement, securities would be posted.
Securities. Okay.
So in order for those securities to be released, the evidence of that, of the, we'll say demolition, it's obviously not demolition, it's the removal of the garden suite would have to be provided.
20 years. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Back?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, if I understand this correctly, money will be withheld or held by the township for 20 years?
In researching this report, my understanding is in the past, $1,000 security was held on behalf of the township, and that was then released upon conditions.
20 years later?
I would have to double check that. I'm not sure, but it looked like we did release it at some point. Whether or not it was 20 years down the road, I'm not sure. I don't think we've had one for 20 years, so.
Is that plus interest, or here's your $1,000 back?
I would have to double check that.
Okay. I'd like to know that. I think just for holding people's money for 20 years,
Sure.
that's a lot. From an aspect of age and place and a growing seniors population, I really do think these granny garden, pardon me? Are they garden suites? Okay, sorry, I'm calling them granny suites.
People do call them granny suites as well.
Sorry. It could be grandpa suites, too. I think that they are a fantastic solution, you know, being close proximity to their actual, you know, children and grandchildren and whatnot. Can I ask, though, why we don't allow more of these, or why that's only 20 years in the Planning Act?
Yes, so the 20 years comes from the Planning Act, and that's actually been extended from 10 years, is my understanding. I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question?
Well, I think my question is, with regards to an aging population and also perhaps affordable housing, in a sense, for people's children who probably won't be able to afford homes. When you have acreage like this, to me it makes sense, not only even if it's not a relative, that you're able to use better use of the farmland, in a sense, to have, even if it's a rental.
Absolutely. So I believe the thought process here was, as I mentioned, the official plan does permit it in any zone that allows for residential uses, which is pretty much all in most of the zones, and which is where you'd want them anyway. The idea behind the rezoning is the fact that we want to deal with them on a case-by-case basis, to make sure that not necessarily whether or not they're appropriate, but where they're being located is appropriate. It obviously gives council the opportunity to voice their concerns should it not be. For example, if it's located in the downtown core, or in a shoreline residential area, you wouldn't want them closer to the street than the house. That's one of the requirements, is that it's in the rear yard. This process allows for that, to ensure that that's viewed.
And do the garden suites, do they have to be a relative to be living in that, or can it be open to anyone that wanted to have an additional?
As part of the garden suite agreement, the occupants are listed. So in this, I guess, in the past, we've specified the occupants. So, yes, I guess maybe they don't have to be related, but they would have to be specified.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you.
Any other first-time questions? Councillor Somerville?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that stimulated me to ask another question, because I was just thinking, if you have a farm hand, or an employee that's working on your farm, they can have housing like this, can they not?
For agricultural uses, the agricultural zone does permit what's called a bunkhouse, which is for farm-related health in that sense. So they wouldn't have to go through this process.
And my other question is, who follows up to make sure, does the building inspector go out when the trailer comes in to make sure that the septic tank and the well and all of the conditions have been met?
My understanding is that a building permit's required, so that will be part of their inspection.
After it's located and then, yes, before they can move in. Okay, that's great, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, I just have one quick question. If a building permit is taken out, then does that not trigger an impact notice? And then that might lead to my question about, are property taxes affected by in-law suites or granny suites or garden suites?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer that from a planning perspective. That might be a question better suited to the tax department. I'm not sure.
All right, maybe when this comes back, if that's just answered on that part there, just for my own reference. Okay, any other questions? Oh, okay, Mr. Laura?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can respond to that question. So, yes, indeed, when a building permit is taken out, there is a copy of that permit sent to MPAC, and then MPAC would inspect that from an assessment perspective, and they make a determination whether that resulted in an increase in taxes.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Thank you. Okay, so Tammy Finlay, do you have anything to add on behalf of the application? Good. Okay, are there any questions from council for the applicant? Okay, at this time, are there any members of the public who wish to speak to the application? If so, please proceed to the microphone at the podium there and state your name and municipal address for the record. All right. Seeing none, then one final ask to council if there are any questions. Okay, well, thank you to for all those in attendance for this meeting and providing your input into this statutory public information meeting. This concludes the statutory public information meeting, and at this time, I would like to bring forward report item 11.2, Staff Report Dev 2018-006, page 19 on your agenda, moved by Councillor Drew, seconded by Councillor Somerville, the recommended motion, which is relating to the application to amend the zoning bylaw 1414, submitted by Tammy Finlay to rezone a portion of the lands under the temporary use provisions of Section 39 of the Planning Act to permit the installation of a 99 square meter garden suite for a temporary period of up to 20 years, be received as input into the statutory public meeting scheduled for March 19, 2018, and that staff report back to council with a recommendation on this application at a future Planning and Community Affairs Committee meeting. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Now, at this time, item 10.1, I have my conflict, so I'm going to change chairs.
Mr. Hack, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of council and members of staff and public, this is a presentation of our report. And we're obviously happy to answer questions. And you have to excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold, so my voice is in and out, so try to sit close to the microphone on best. And like I said, we have to answer any questions. So we were retained separate and apart from the recreation master plan.
Apologies for the interruption. Is your microphone pressed?
It is now. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So, just to restate the first slide, Sierra Planning and Management is also doing the Recreation Master Plan, which is now in the hands of staff, having been through drafting and revisions, and now sort of the final stages before coming back to council for its consideration. This analysis dovetails with it, but it is addressing matters that came before council as it relates to the opportunities to develop an indoor pool. And so part of the reason it's coming at this stage and not 6 months prior to this is that we wanted to make sure that in coming up with this analysis we were in lockstep with the provisions of the Recreation Master Plan, because it is all tied together quite closely in terms of the implications of building indoor pools versus other facilities that might be required. So this is the reason we've delayed to this point to give a more comprehensive assessment. So it is, as we say here, a critical analysis of opportunities to develop and operate a municipal standard indoor pool. So the working assumption here, and I would just ask everyone to focus on this in the questions that follow, is that we're talking about municipal standard pool, not a hotel pool or another type. The aspiration was fairly clear from the Recreation Master Plan that it should be an indoor pool of similar standard that you would find in other municipalities. The analysis included then the merit of an indoor pool as part of the condominium development that's proposed at the south end of town, what we refer to here as the Stockworth development. In order to look at that, we had to sort of take a step back, and as we have done in the Recreation Master Plan for other assets, looked at, what is the sort of demand and supply for pools, indoor pools, recognizing that they are major capital assets, both in terms of their initial build and then looking after them over the lifetime of those buildings, and that's separate and apart from the operations. We undertook a field review of all the sites that were under consideration, and we also reviewed the development plans, not only by ourselves in terms of recreation planners and management consultants, but we have on our team a chap by the name of Jamie Lopez, who's an aquatic design specialist with DEI and Associates out of Kitchener. So he and I reviewed all of these plans and the potential locations for alternatives to the development as part of the Stockworth project. So in doing that, in providing some analysis, we had to look at what we thought were the basic facility requirements, as well as the lost opportunities from development on either a standalone site or as part of a private development. So in other words, looking at the Stockworth development in terms of what it contributes potentially versus what it might cost in terms of not only capital costs, which may not be the same in a municipal ownership scenario, but also whether or not it represents best practice for the kinds of facilities that we're putting forward here. We also look at capital cost estimates for a private pool versus a municipal pool, or what we refer to as a Class A versus Class B pool. And then, importantly, to give you an indication of the operating cost considerations and why it's important, therefore, to think very carefully about the location and how these buildings function. Less and less you will see standalone swimming pools being built. More and more you'll see them being built as part of multi-use facilities. We also then obviously conferred with the developers through this process. We also, via the Parks, Recreation and Culture Strategic Master Plan, had public input and sought the the advice of the citizens in terms of their needs, and that's been reported both in this document and in the master plan, and then we have produced the report as well. So in background here, the Stockworth development, obviously it's a very significant development. The site plan has been signed, I understand, and you know, there is some activity on the site. In terms of its scale, it's not small. It's 248, so 250 residential units, about 100,000 square feet of commercial office space, open space provisions around the stormwater management pond and elsewhere. And in terms of what's relevant for our piece of work here, the idea of a buffer building, the building that would separate essentially this development from the commercial development that exists to the north. And, you know, in that building, there are a number of uses that were being considered, potentially fitness, potentially the pool, and also a number of levels of structured parking as well. So that just gives you an indication there on screen of which building we're referring to, and that we understand would be the very first building that would be built as part of this project. So moving on to, you know, the demand and supply, it's very, I mean, every community will aspire to have an indoor pool, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. From a, you know, fiscal management point of view, it's a case of what should the service be, how do you fund it, and therefore over what period of time do you take a plan from concept to delivery. And the master plan has some recommendations in that regard. But very firstly, we want to understand, before we interviewed people via the survey, what is the supply? So there is no indoor pool as such in the township of Scugog. There is one in Uxbridge, obviously, the Ux pool. And we've laid out here, as you can see here, we've looked at the regionality, the regional supply within you know, 30 kilometers as the crow flies radius from Port Perry, and you can see the number of pools that are there as well. So all of these pools, to some degree, are in play in terms of people's preferences for uses, but there's really 2 or 3 that currently are used. So it currently is a case of the market resolving its own needs and wants. There is no pool here, there is no operating cost to you, therefore there is no capital cost to the township, and the users of the pool in Uxbridge, a certain proportion of them come from Scugog, and also Oshawa and other places benefit from the patronage from residents of Scugog as well. So that's really the lay of the land. So it needs to be looked at on a regional basis. So understanding that as a municipality, there's a you know, a need and a concern to plan for what the residents want. The current situation is one of a regional, more of a regional supply. Looking at the demands, firstly, just focusing on the public online survey undertaken as part of the Recreation Master Plan, we asked questions of all facility types in terms of what do you use. We also asked what you know, what's your level of satisfaction. But we certainly, in regard to the pools, asked, you know, where do you use pools? Because we recognize that aquatic services is something that people will take advantage of, whether or not you have a facility in town. So as you can see there, 67% of the respondents to the survey indicated that the Legends pool in Oshawa was their pool that they use predominantly. And that pool, if you are aware of that complex, that's not a standalone swimming pool. That is a great facility. I think it's got 4 ice pads, walking track, library. The pool itself is an interesting mix of lane swimming to some degree, but then a leisure pool component to it, and it may have a couple of other tubs in there as well. So it functions very much as a leisure pool and as a you know, a lane pool that can be used by competitive swimmers. And lots of glass and looks great, and it's new, so relatively new. So that's at one end of the spectrum. But still, almost half of the respondents indicated that they use the Ux pool which, as you know, is I think it's a 1983 facility. It's much more utilitarian. It's certainly pretty close by, and it serves a purpose. And if you look at the proportion of users of that facility, so not the survey respondents, how many went to the Uxx pool, but rather looking at the utilization of the Uxx pool and asking them, so we asked Uxbridge how many people, what percentage comes from Scugog. It's a fair percentage, and I think it's just under 40%, something like that. It should be in the report. So it's fairly significant, that relationship. So obviously we did look at, some questions of whether or not there's an opportunity for cost sharing a new pool. There is a plan in Uxbridge to develop a new pool at some point in the future at the Fields of Uxbridge Sports Complex, which is being promoted. It needs to be funded. And the idea is that facility would be a pool, but it might have a field house or some other component with it. It would not, at this point, have an arena attached to it. So that's out there as, one thing that is happening at some point in the future. And then you can see some of the other facilities that are being used, Lindsay Rec Complex, and then even as far south, going down to the Whitby Civic Rec Complex. And the landscape's changing a bit. I think there's some additional development that's going in. I think Brooklyn has another facility that's going in. It could be mistaken about that, but I believe it does. And so you're going to see additions to the regional supply over time. And to the extent that it's not just happening within that 30K radius, but, Cornell in Markham, there are more pools being developed in that area of the 905, and so you're going to see some demand shift there. Whitchurch Stovall wants another addition to its pool. Now, Whitchurch Stovall doesn't really supply Scugog, but to the extent it supplies people that are closer to Whitchurch Stovall, you're going to see more demand open up potentially for other pools in this region, so Legends and the Uxx pool. So without getting too complicated about it, it is a pretty dynamic environment. There are pools being built, and the real question is, do you need to throw yourselves into that business right at this particular time? So that's sort of the cold sort of analytics of it. In terms of what the public online survey reported back, in terms of what people feel are needed, what facilities are needed, you have the results there fairly clearly. A pool, not an outdoor pool, but an indoor pool, was cited by 72% of respondents. A gymnasium, 15%, and then the rest falls off quite dramatically. So I think it's important for us, and hopefully our report and the master plan has conveyed that, is from an aspirational point of view, having an indoor pool, notwithstanding the fact that you can drive a certain distance and get good aquatic services, there is a desire on the part of the resident base. The next question, of course, is whether there's a desire to pay for it in terms of the costs that come with the operations. Excuse me. The consideration of the Stockworth, as I mentioned, it wasn't a case of just looking at Stockworth and saying, these are the plans, they fail or they succeed based on that. It was also a case of what alternatives to Stockworth as a development site for a pool exist in town. And so the first one was really a development that was, and the staff report that's before you considers this as well. This is a vacated school site, as you know. It's pretty much equidistant between Uxbridge and Port Perry, so it was brought forward not for any other reason than if there were an opportunity to cost share, recognizing that when you start to talk about cost sharing, location suddenly then looms very large in terms of what people are willing to give up in terms of proximity. We did look at the site, but it's important that everyone recognizes that we have not done a site select. We have not gone down the road of doing a detailed site selection analysis for an indoor pool at this point. But there are obviously some clear winners in terms of where you would probably develop if you're going to develop in Scugog. So the Epsom site is really, and the report is very clear, is not ideal for a pool. Obviously, it's a very rural location. And the fact of the matter is that a pool of this scale needs a tremendous amount of services, needs a lot of electricity, needs a lot of utilities generally, gas lines. What you do with the discharged water is very important. There are examples around the province where it doesn't always get piped into services and taken away through a sanitary sewer system or wastewater system. There are some innovations where you see the chlorine taken out of the water by having it discharge out into basically field beds where it can then naturally clean itself, and then it's put back into the water system. But those are few and far between. And above and beyond this, it's not common practice, as I said, to build standalone facilities for a lot of reasons. So this would certainly be an expensive build, and it would certainly be the highest cost to operate, assuming the same scale of facility. So for that reason, we looked at this, but we were able to conclude pretty much at the point when we were there that, it's not going to work. Now, the one that, without any doubt, offers the best in terms of meeting best practice and best opportunity for reduction of capital costs. Again, remember always to be apples to apples. We have to assume the same size of facility. And when I start to talk about the Stockworth plan, you'll see that it starts to get a little wobbly when you start talking about what square footage might be available in the Stockworth option. That's not necessarily a municipal standard, but like for like, the Scugog Community Recreation Complex represents likely the most effective location for reducing capital costs and for achieving operating efficiencies. It's obviously a township-owned site, so there's no control issues or shared use agreements that are required between you and the developer. It's in the urban center. It has shared services. It's co-located, and that's critical. It's got proximity to a number of different user groups. And as I said, there are likely to be operating synergies as well. And one of the things that we should, I think, all be aware of is that there are, innovations you see around the country in terms of having energy recovery. So, ice plants, they create heat. In order to create ice, you have to create heat as a waste product. That waste product can be used to heat the water or to heat the natatorium of the pool itself. So, as council may well know, the area that we've placed this very broad footprint, and that is not meant to represent a design consideration, but really meant to represent a scale of a building. That's about 27,000 square feet. And it's obviously got a lane pool, a warm pool, and then some leisure elements to it. So you may or may not decide to go down that route and have that scale of facility, and that's fine. But what we wanted to do is place it on this site to see whether it fits. There is an existing, when the twinning was done, there was an existing sort of plan, illustration of a future site for an indoor pool, and it was behind the community hall there where we've placed it. Parking and other things on the site would need to be resolved, obviously. There's I forget whether it's an HVAC unit or even a transformer unit that is, if I just try and show maybe on one of the screens. No, don't want to break that. Doesn't want to work. Just where that yellow sort of foyer is, there is a mechanical unit around there that might mean that the building needs to be set back a little bit. Every site has its complications. This actually, though, overall is a good site. So those, as I said, are the considerations for a municipal standard pool. And just to give you an indication of what is a municipal standard pool, you're really looking at a minimum of and some people would say a maximum, but a 25-meter pool certainly no less than that, so that's the length. Whether it be 4 lanes, the YMCA will have a typical sort of footprint for a pool of maybe 4 lanes. Municipal pools, probably 6, 8, you might even see 10 some, and that's for a lane pool. The leisure pool would then fit around it, which is different. So we're getting into a fairly large scale there. Legends is a good example where they've really married those two things together, so it's part lane pool, part leisure pool. And then whether you have things like zero access, entry, which is basically a beach access, which is important for accessibility. It's important for toddlers, so that you don't have to put tables and other things in the water to be able to support them. These are all the innovations that you expect in a municipal facility. But above and beyond that, what we're seeing around the country generally is an indoor aquatic center is seen as one important component of a multi-use building. So whether there's a library there, or there is a fitness space, or there are meeting rooms, or whether there are 2 ice rinks attached to it, or even in the case, if you just travel down to Port Hope, for example, the facility there, there's a little pool attached, there's a nice pool attached to a renovated single-pad arena. The idea is co-location and a sufficiency of parking around it that allows it to function as a place where you can drop, one child or a grandparent or a sibling off for doing one activity, and you can do other activities. And then actually, just to go one step further, a lot of what we're seeing in recreation planning as well is about recognizing that there's a limited amount of time they have. So parents and others want to be able to, they don't want to necessarily have to sit behind the glass and watch. They might want to go use the computer, might even want to work out themselves. All of that translates into space requirements that are beneficial. So with that in mind, looking at the Stockworth development, we looked at the floor plans which have been developed, and they really are concept level. They haven't drilled down into a great deal of detail, and so we have estimated what we think might be the amount of space that actually is being given over to this use for public use, but it's not clear exactly what that amount of space was, and I don't think, with all due respect to the developer, they had necessarily given consideration to exactly what the demarcation of space might be, but somewhere in around sort of 18,000 square feet. So that by itself is not necessarily that's a minimum that you would expect. The public pool that you see there is a 25-meter length, and so they have done that. And just to sort of, again, give a little bit of context to it, the primary reason for this building is to provide multi-use, but not in the sense of multi-use that you would wish to have for resident access to recreation. So it really is, it's being used for a fitness club for condominium residents, structured parking, and then this pool being placed in there as well. So our comments are not on the efficacy of the site plan in general, but just on whether or not the pool as drawn, and recognizing the pool is not a fully fleshed out concept, meets what we think the needs are for Scugog. So when we reviewed the plans, our aquatic design specialist noted almost straight away a few things which were of significance. So yes, the pool is, the actual main pool there would meet minimum standards of around 25 meters in length, but the decking, and that's the space from the water's edge back to the edge of the building, that can be used for walking around, dry land classes, storing certain equipment during the day. That certainly is tighter than you would wish in a municipal pool, there's no question. The other aspect to this, which can't be seen there, but if you look, it's on the 4th floor. It was actually on the 3rd and 4th floor, so it's a double height. But if you're putting a pool that has presumably enough depth to be able to have adults swim in there and it to be safe, it's going to have a certain depth to it, which means that you're going to have a limitation on the floor to ceiling height. Most pools that you go to, obviously, you walk in and they have that cathedral style structure. They're big spaces, And most of the hotel pools that you go to, as you know, you go in and the thing that may strike you straight away is it seems like it's a little bit cramped. And that's not necessarily what this would be, but it certainly would be more on the cramped ambience than the municipal ambience. So right there and then, it may seem like a small point, but in terms of the public's perception of what they're getting for municipal tax dollars, we would certainly raise maybe some concerns on that. Getting to the third floor, I'm sure there would be provisions for accessibility, but that would be accessibility through elevators. And that would really be the way that everyone would get to the building. So it doesn't lend itself to having an easy time of it for parents with small children and prams and all the other things that you need to get to and from these kinds of facilities. The other aspect is, without having gone into a costing analysis for this, we can see straight away that putting a pool on a third floor, it's like putting an ice rink on a third floor. That's a big, heavy load. There's an extra structural cost that you would not necessarily have to bear if you allowed Mother Earth to carry the weight of the pool itself. So these are the sorts of things that we know would be an issue. The other thing, and it did surprise us a little bit, but the idea is that the parking essentially would not be free, would not be part of the development. It would be essentially a cost to the municipality because by putting a pool on the third and fourth floors, you would be displacing parking potentially for residents, and therefore there would be a need to, as the developer explained it to us, to go underground. Now, whether you eventually actually have to do that or you just put another building close by, I'm not sure, but the point is that there is a cost way above what it would be to provide surface parking on a municipally owned and controlled site. As a result of that, based on what we perceive to be the capital cost, but also what the design would be like, the accessibility, and recognizing as we got into discussions with the developer that this would be, if a pool was built in this facility, it would be to the account of the municipality in terms of capital cost as well as operating cost. In other words, a pool of this size is not something that Stockworth Developments would likely consider. Now, whether they would consider a smaller pool to be used for the condominium residents, I think that's a conversation that would need to be ongoing with them. And I know that, you know, if there were time available to have that pool rented out for community use, I'm sure they would be happy to do so. The point is then, the municipality itself doesn't need to be involved in that. If there is a pool there and there's available swimming time, it can be rented out and the public can take advantage of it. What we're talking about here is a municipal standard pool where you control, you program, and you're seeking to make that part of the recreation service base for the community. So as a result, our recommendation is that the township doesn't pursue plans to develop a municipal pool as part of that development. And so, you know, that's not to say no pool. In fact, you know, quite the contrary. I need to go through a couple of other slides just to tell you why it's important that you don't put provision in that option, but rather undertake a longer-term planning process for having a municipal pool that would meet the needs of everyone and would be quite an iconic building for the township. And that's because the capital costs of these things, they're fairly significant. I mean, capital costs in the order all in of, you know, $550 to $600 a square foot would not be uncommon for this kind of facility. You have to recognize that the aspirations of the community, as best as we can tell from the survey, are for a municipal standard pool, a Class A pool. And then, perhaps most importantly, it's a recognition of the operating costs. The operating costs, pools are the most significant capital assets in terms of potential operating liabilities for municipalities. And I'd say municipalities rather than other providers like the YMCA that have a slightly different model. But we gave you some examples here on the page of the type of building. So if you look at the middle example there, the building typology there would be a 25-meter lane indoor pool In terms of the annual deficit, so the bottom line is what we're interested in, somewhere in the order of 350 to 500,000 is the kind of range that we've seen. And just to give you an indication, the Uxpool, they were kind enough to provide their anticipated budget for this year for that pool, and they were projecting a deficit of around $345,000. You know, and that's a relatively simple pool building. So it gets more complicated depending on the kinds of pools that you have, and everybody wants a 50-meter pool, and you know, you can double your deficits when you do that very quickly. So it's a significant proposition, and it's why you know, we do recommend firstly that the location of the rec complex is far and away the best location because of the efficiencies in all respects, in terms of just energy, capital costs, HVAC, but also operations and staffing as well. You have a base of staffing there. You'll obviously have to add more staff, but it's not like you're building in a greenfield somewhere else, or excuse me, operating in a private development under a shared use agreement. So that's where we are. We did also, at staff's recommendation, because recognizing that there are other models out there, the YMCA is one such model, and it's interesting that the potential is for, you know, a significant deficit to a municipality versus the YMCA that can run these things. They do have a different model. They do have a cost-sharing approach across their facilities, and they do have a membership base, which provides, you know, additional services. Their goal is always to obviously break even if they can, and a number of the agreements that you see across Ontario more recently, outside of the big cities where, you know, the market can really support you know, significant investment, in places like Quinte West, or the other one that comes to mind is Clarence Rockland, just outside Ottawa. The agreement is really that there very much is a partnership. The municipality pays for the capital. It may pay for some of the maintenance, the big-ticket maintenance on the buildings, the life cycle issues. But in terms of the operating costs of running the pool, and obviously running the programs, the Y will do that. And they will charge what they will charge. Now, in the case of Clarence Rockland, the municipality actually subsidizes back to the community, because the YMCA has a higher priced membership base for you to use that pool, but the municipality is, for the next sort of few years, going to continue to subsidize the cost of that. But in places like Quinte West, you know, there are, if you look at the agreements, the idea is that it seeks to achieve a break-even over a period of time, and then if it does create any surplus, although the building is owned by the municipality, the YMCA would be responsible for that surplus, having generated it through their programming base, and then they would reap the benefits of that, and it would be reinvested in the programming in the building. So the real question then becomes, in the long-range planning, can Scugog obtain the interests of a group like the YMCA to come to town to build? And their interests are always going to be ones where there is an opportunity to achieve a number of their aims under one roof. So that might include things other than just a pool itself. So our overall recommendations are to recognize that the residents of Scugog have a strong desire for a pool. The residents, based on the survey, clearly use indoor pools. They use them elsewhere. So we need to keep an eye on the changing nature of supply and demand. And then also to continue, therefore, as we say in the Recreation Master Plan, to recognize at some point in the future there may be an opportunity for a cost-effective solution based on some partnerships. And in order to do that, work should be undertaken to undertake a bit more of the conceptual design planning that's necessary to achieve that. There was a question posed to us just on the efficacy of enclosing an outdoor pool. It can be done. It's not ideal. You still need to put a a building around it. If you want windows, it's going to have a certain structure. If you want it to be very utilitarian, it can happen. It's really not something that we would recommend that you do. It's not going to give the kind of service that is going to draw people away from the Legends or from the Uxpool. And so it's not in the report, but it is something that was asked of us, and so that's our opinion on that. So that's it. Sorry for the long presentation, but hopefully that's answered some of your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hack, for your presentation. Questions from council? Councillor Drew?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and Craig, thank you for an excellent report. I read it thoroughly, and as you know, Craig, I had a few questions for you today. I feel that the 30-kilometer range is too big. I live in Port Perry. I swim at Uxpool, but I find that the extra time that it takes to get there, which is, it's only 20 minutes, but it often means I can't go because of my schedule. And it means that, people can't go in their lunch hour. They can't, if they work in town here, they can't go before work. They may be able to go after. So I feel that the 20 kilometers is more realistic. And within that 20 kilometers is basically just Legends and Uxpool. I am one of the 72% that would like to have a pool, but I'm also realistic, and I know that it'll take a lot of money and a lot of planning. And certainly the development charge update that we have next year, is it? The bylaw, the development charge bylaw?
Through you, Madam Chair, we're starting that study this year.
Mm-hmm.
We hope to have it well underway. It'll probably be completed in the new year of 19. Correct.
Okay, thank you. And, I would suggest that is something that we are going to have to pay real attention to, this is what the people want. In the meantime, I can see that community use agreements would give us another indication of the use of pools, and that community use agreement can be with Stockworth or other opportunities that might arise in the next few years. I know that we have an indoor private pool here that people take advantage of. It's very small. People do take advantage of it, but it's very restrictive in that it is too warm, so it is only good for classes for arthritis, and for small children, basically, and some swimming lessons, but basically for fitness, no, absolutely not. So, anyway, again, thank you for the report. I think what your recommendation at the community center is ideal. It drills down the operating costs, and probably the capital costs as well. So, thank you again, and we'll look forward to future planning.
Councillor Back?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation and your work with this and the master plan as well. I have several points and questions. One just actually off of Councillor Drew's question about the development charges. So to our CAO or our Director of Community Services, is it planning? So if we're having a DC update with proposed increases, would that apply to current applications that are already approved for the housing, or will that be for future?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. It will, depending on when the building permits are drawn and the status of the DC background study and bylaw, that's the rate that applies for the permits as they're drawn. So if the permits are drawn now, it'll be under the current bylaw, and as soon as the bylaw is changed, then that rate will apply to all future permits.
So then how much of the proposed future 1,300 units would we perhaps be able to capture under an increased development charge?
Through you, Madam Chair, the bulk of it, for sure. We're finding that this year, the development starts a little bit slower than we had expected. I think people are just a little cautious on the market. We'll see what the spring brings, but we're not going to, I don't think we're going to get the, 150 units that we were counting on. It's probably going to be less, probably more like half of that or less this year. But we're still quite confident that the rest of that 1,200 unit is going to pick up because of the demand that's in place for the community. So we're trying to get the DC background study evaluated and in place as soon as we can.
Okay, well, that's good, because I'd hate to see that the gate closes after the horse is long gone. Councilor Back, may I just remind you that we're asking questions of the presentation. We'll get to the report right after this, so if we have any questions for Mr. Hack, we can address them then.
Oh, let me look.
And just for your, for Brooklyn, I believe their pool is either this year, I think it's proposed for this year on Vi Pond. That's that complex. Let me look for questions for, okay. Bear with me. I have to go through all my, decipher if there are questions for you or for staff. Okay, on page 58, just a comment with regards to the different pools in the area, and sort of echoing Councillor Drew, with all due respect, the fact that residents are currently using other pools, that's purely out of necessity. We do have a large senior population as well as very young children, and using neighboring towns, it's just not convenient. It's not an ideal. As well, your respondents to the survey of 72 to 79% on the different questions, saying that it's a top priority, we really do need to listen to that and put it as a priority, not a long-term. Let me look for my questions. That's staff. Aren't you lucky? My questions are mostly for staff. Page 63, with regards to the YMCA, they had a program a few years back, 10 pools for 10 years, or in 10 years. Is that program still, is it completed?
I'm not sure. They're pretty active around the province, and they work in many different scales of urban areas. So the real, and I'll give you an indication of strategy, just if I may, just on the observation that you quite rightly make, that, no one's driving to Whitchurch, Stouffville to use a pool, unless they're going there for some competition or something, and we see that in the numbers. I think we had it originally, and I think it was about 0.5% of users of Whitchurch, Stouffville come from Uxbridge, so very small. So you're right, but the issue is if you look at Uxbridge and Scugog together, and I'm not a big fan of standards, because it's not the standards reflect effectively the willingness of a community to spend the money to subsidize a pool. So in other words, you can have a small community, but once that pool, they build it, and there's your standard of one indoor pool per 15,000 people. Most of the time you see somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people servicing, or having one pool servicing that many people. So if you put Uxbridge and Scugog together, and maybe if you threw in Brock as well, you're up there at the sort of 40,000 mark straight away. So it does, even if you recognizing that you don't want to drive too far, you're kind of at that standard. So you are at the point where, you would start to think about a new pool in the future if the development in town and elsewhere starts to percolate a little bit more than has happened in recent years. That may be an argument for you, Councillor Back, in terms of justifying, based on standards, having a pool in town. So that's just a comment. In terms of the YMCA, they're working, as I say, across the province in different areas. My sense of it is that they are looking for willing municipal partners, and a recognition that there has to be real cost sharing. Quinte West obviously is a bit of a bigger community, but that one works. There's other small standalone YMCA's, in places like Coburg, and then you've got the bigger facilities. There's one just being built in downtown Brantford, which is a partnership between the YMCA and the university. I forget which university, Laurentian, I think, in Brantford, and the city of Brantford is kicking in as a partner to that. So I think that recommendation we have to look for partners would be very well served if you start the design process, or at least having the concept, having it gone further than what we've suggested, because then there's something material to talk about, I think, with potential partners.
So I have one more question. You're lucky you get off the hook here. So with regard to the design process, and so for number 3 recommendation, saying 2019 and then 2020 to 24, is that just for the design, or is that for the 2019 for your design and then a 4 or 5 year plan to fund it?
I think I'd have to
Maybe
refer
that's
that
not
back to Carol, perhaps.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, that recommendation is just meant in next year's budget and forecast, somewhere within that 5-year period, we're going to try and get the design alone into the budget. The design alone is probably going to be $1 million+, so that's a big chunk of cash alone. So, I think with our other priorities, I don't sort of talk about too much here, but going through the Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan, the highest priority is replacement in the Blackstock Arena, which is a very large capital cost, and it's hard for us to do both that and the pool within the short term. So that's why this is in the longer term, the pool.
I'll reserve my questions for when the report comes. Thank you. Any further questions from council? Okay. I have it moved by Councillor Back, seconded by Councillor Drew, that presentation by John Hack, Director, Sierra Planning and Management, regarding analysis of indoor pool options be received. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Hack. I hope you feel better. And at this time, I'd like to move forward 11.9 on the agenda, the analysis of the pool option. Mr. Belfry, is there a presentation that you have for the report? That was a presentation? Perfect. I'll open it up to council now for any questions. Councillor Back. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to have to go through and see which ones are for staff now. Okay, so for recommendation number 4 on page 56, an establishment of a reserve, what does that mean? That's not another levy, is it?
Through the chair, the councillor, the establishment of the reserve is a recommendation that we're making that finance look into the development of a reserve strategy, so that money can be put away. It's not a surcharge or anything we're looking at. Those options have to be fleshed out at this point, but it's something that should be looked at. There needs to be a plan put in place to start putting money away for these kind of projects.
Okay, because I don't want to hear the word levy on top of levy. Then, bear with me here. On page 60, and Mr. Hack had spoken on this with regards to parking. Would that be part of the design? Because and the design concept of the pool would also be additional parking on that land, because right now it's tight. Any given night when there's hockey, you can't find a parking spot to begin with. I can't imagine if a gymnasium and indoor pool were added to those lands.
Through the chair of the council, in reference to the SCRC, there would be additional parking. There's areas that have grass at the front that have been looked at for additional parking in the past, to expand on that. There's also an area to the back of the building which is a gravel parking lot right now, which can be expanded on, so that would help with those issues.
Okay. Bear with me, I'm almost done. Page 64, with regards to the annual anticipated deficit, I obviously like the 350 to 500 versus that larger one. Now, sort of a two-pronged. What is the current operating deficit of the outdoor pool?
The outdoor pool would operate,
Is it about 70,000?
It's around that, yeah. I'm just calculating out the cost of everything in my head right now. But
Trying to recall from past years.
It's about 70,000.
So 70,000, so in an ideal situation, if we had a fantastic indoor facility, aquatics facility, in all realistic terms, we would mothball the outdoor, save 70,000 a year in operating to offset the indoor, correct?
Through the chair, ideally, you would probably look at mothballing the outdoor
I
pool.
hope so. So then my second question is, where does that, so you're looking at then a $290,000 to $430,000 yearly operating deficit, where does that come from? Because I would not want to see 3 to 5% tax hike.
Through the chair of the councillor, traditionally, that's the revenue source where that's coming from, is tax revenues. You'll be able to offset some revenues through sponsorships or naming of areas of the facility or advertising, but traditionally, that's what's borne, no different than what's borne by the arena and the general public on their operating deficits.
Now, obviously, we hope to have growth, so then that would increase in homes would offset that a little bit. Would that be a one-year increase? Once it's in, it carries forth? It's not a 5 plus a 5?
That would be, every year, you're looking at $300,000 to $400,000, no different than the arena budgets.
But that's,
everything's based on.
But that's in your budget carrying forward?
Yeah.
So it's really initially a tax hike, and
Yeah.
then it's...
Then it's maintained.
Okay, so realistically then, if we do get our 1,200 to 1,400 homes, it may be balanced to about a 2.5 increase, and if we did get naming rights, which would be lovely, we actually, it is feasible with a perhaps 1% increase, 1 to 1.5. I'm just saying this because I really want a pool. I'm one of those 73 as well, and I know most people in this town want and need a pool. And I think for us to say 10 years is 10 years too late. There are children that would be gone out of the house by then. There are seniors that, by that time they may not be able to get to the pool. So people want it now, or in at least the next 5 years. 10 years to me in government means 15 to 20 years. So I really hope that staff and council and the next council really does look to making it a priority. Just like the roads, a pool is a priority. I was very disappointed, I'm sure other councillors were, with the fact that the Stockworth doesn't look like it's going to be feasible. I see from the developer's standpoint, but more so the township, there's no way we can put money into a non-municipally owned building and pay for it when a facility like that should have a pool, but obviously not on a grand scale, so we can't ask the developer to do that. But at the same time, I'm from Ajax, and Ajax, before our CAO and our Director of Community Services came, we had an indoor pool with 10,000 people. I'm shocked that there's 3 now. I thought there was only 2. But there is a question to Mr. Heritage. Where did those second and third pools come from? Were those from the increased DC from growth in Ajax? Because when we had that indoor pool, there wasn't many new homes at all at that particular time. That was pre-growth. Or was it from the casino? Where did that money come from?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can respond to that. So those funds came from a number of places, and you've hit the primary to nail right on the head, as they say. Some casino slot money was used, considerable amount, and DCs, and then after that, some taxes also. But they do have that luxury of having that slot money, which really helped in those areas.
Right, because I'm amazed, because the taxes in Ajax are still quite affordable, and the fact that they have 3 pools now, gobsmacked, 3 pools. And that's it. I'd just like to see a pool put to the top versus 10 years out, because to me, that's not acceptable. Mr. CAO has something to add to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think that as the review has shown, the residents would like a pool. There's a strong desire for a pool. Staff have heard that, council's heard that, and now I think it's how we plan to get to that point. What's been mentioned is the Blackstock Arena replacement needs to come first. That's what the strategy is going to identify as the priority, but we need to get on with determining how we're going to build and fund a pool. So this report that you have before you from staff takes an approach to that and establishes that the way we should go about this is, as the Director of Community Services has said, let's get the design into the long-range capital forecast. See if we can fit it in there, and let's do the design in the next 5 years. And you won't know your costs until you do a design. And once you have a design, then you can cost it and you know what you're dealing with. But even in the meantime, before we get to the design, let's establish a reserve fund. As you know, council has reduced the reserve transfer to the levy by over $800,000 in the last 2 years. There's going to be some funds to be able to put into reserves. And we could start to establish, to build a reserve for this purpose. Additionally, as you already mentioned, Councillor Back, the DC background study is being opened this year, and we have a real prime opportunity to put a strong estimate in for the pool and start collecting for that pool. The current DC background study is not collecting for a pool. It's shown to be out to 2023 and beyond. The DC background study is currently collecting for the Blackstock Arena, but not the pool. So we need to fix that also. And then, in the meantime, also look for possible funding opportunities. But I think you'll find the staff's in agreement with council and the public that the municipality would desire a pool. We have to start planning financially of how that can happen.
Councillor Drew?
Thank you. I would just like to add, if we get started on the design and the plans for a reserve fund and the DCs, we work on that design, it will give us an opportunity to apply for grants, because so many times you have to be shovel-ready. And so if we work on the design and work on the plans, and then we would maybe be in a position when funds are freed up federally or provincially for recreation purposes, we may be in a position to apply and get it, which is exactly what happened with the waterfront. We were ready.
Thank you, Councillor Drew. Any other first-time questions from council? Councillor Back?
Thank you. It's just a question to our CAO. So when if we aggressively, really, and creatively look for a reserve starting now for this pool, and not necessarily only from DC charges, obviously there will be, but other creative ways, when we get that money, we're shovel-ready, we can build from that. Is it not also realistic that some of those creative ways that you find funding for that specific reserve could also be the offset of the capital, or not capital, the operating yearly, so that we actually then build, and then we can use those creative ways that we've done to operate it without increasing taxes?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that what you're describing, I think, is, how we get to build the facility, the capital costs, and then the operating costs, the operating deficit. I heard you say a couple of things earlier that I would say is what we should be looking at, and that's an examination of our growth over the next 5 to 7 years, and how much of that growth could be used maybe initially to put aside for the pool, and then that contribution on an annual basis to a reserve for a pool could be the operating deficit later, already built into the tax base.
Any further questions? All right. Well, I'm proud to be part of this council to actually start the conversation about a pool. So hopefully this will fast forward into us all jumping into a pool in the next 5 years or so. That being said, it's moved by Councillor Bax, seconded by Councillor Watton, that report COMS 2018-24, analysis of indoor pool options be received, that council support planning for a future municipal pool to be located at the Scugog Community Recreation Center, that a design for a municipal pool be included in the 2019 capital budget and 2020 to 2024 budget forecast if possible, that the establishment of a reserve for construction of a pool be considered through the proposed reserve fund strategy, that an interim solution, the township continue to work with developers for a possible lease agreement for the municipal use of a private sector pool, that the township's 2018-2019 development charge study include an updated cost for a municipal pool which may increase the available funds for a pool, and finally, that the township pursue grant funding for a future municipal pool from other levels of government. All those in favor? Carried.
Excellent. We'll have a pool in 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now on item 11.3, which is COMS 2018-09, site alteration agreement for 2371 Shirley Road. Ms. Fox, do you have a highlight for the report that you've presented or created for us? I can. Just a highlight.
Okay, Mr. Mayor and members of council, I'm here, I actually have three reports to you that I'm bringing this evening, and all three of them are to do with applications that we have under our site alteration bylaw. The first one being 2018-009, which is a site alteration application received for 2371 Shirley Road. This application was submitted on behalf of the property owner, Mr. Hoskin, by Boyle Excavating. The applicant and his representative are here this evening in the gallery. The reason for the report that is coming forward is that our site alteration bylaw states that any importation of fill to a property in excess of 500 cubic meters must be brought before council, and that the property owner must enter into an agreement with the township. So this specific use here for the planned importation of this fill is to fill in a low-lying area on the existing farm, on the Hoskin farm, and to make that land more workable. As you can see on the diagram in the report, there is an area of a regulated area in the north end of this property, and then the area of fill placement is down in the southeast corner of the property. The plan is to import a material to the site. It would get stockpiled, and the township staff would enter into an agreement with the owner prior to this happening. This agreement would outline such items as retaining that qualified person that we've talked about before to supervise the fill operation, conducting the regular soil testing both prior to the material being imported to the site and afterwards, and also then in the end providing the township with verification of the volumes of material that were imported to the site. The agreement also includes a soil management plan, which outlines things like timing for the importation of the fill, the location of the stockpiles, making sure that dust control is in place, sediment erosion control measures, things like that. In addition to the soil sampling undertaken by the applicant, I mentioned the township would retain a third-party environmental consultant to take random samples of the imported stockpiled material before it is spread, and all costs associated with that testing would be borne by the applicant. The applicant is aware of our site alteration bylaw. When they come to the counter with these applications, I always make sure that they understand what is included in the bylaw, the items that they would have to provide to the township should we approve their application. Their application also gets sent through to some other agencies, including the Region of Durham, Kawartha Conservation in this case, because part of the property is regulated. Kawartha Conservation would have an opportunity to comment on our application and also to have the applicant enter into an agreement with them as well. They may choose to do that, too. That would be separate from ours. And as I said, all costs associated with the fill are borne by the applicant, including such things as soil testing. They have to provide us securities, there's surveying involved, legal fees, and inspection services. Area residents, we would send out a mailer to area residents to make sure that they are aware of what is going on, give them an opportunity to provide any comments that they want to provide. And really the purpose of this and the other two reports this evening is for council to authorize staffing to enter into this agreement. The agreement would be signed by the mayor and clerk, but to prepare the agreement is, we do need a little bit of time to do that. So this would be to authorize staff to enter into that agreement, to prepare that agreement.
Okay, questions to Ms. Fox, and we'll just deal with the first one right now. Councillor Watton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Lori, for your report. I have several questions. The first one being, you said area residents would be able to comment, but if we've already approved the site alteration, what sort of comments would you be looking for from them? Based on your communication considerations in the report.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, like I said, this evening what we're asking for is for council to go ahead and allow staff to begin the process of preparing the agreement. So before we enter into the agreement, we would send a mailer out so that area residents could let us know if they have any concerns, and then their concerns would be considered in the preparation of the agreement.
Okay, so, and secondly, through this report, I understand it will take about a year for the amount of soil that's being brought to the site. Do you have any indication of how many trucks that will be and what impact that will have on both the regional road as well as Graham Road? Because I'm not sure. Well, I'd like to say that the regional road won't be able to handle it the way it's deteriorating, but I don't know about Graham Road.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the application is for 40,000 cubic meters of fill. That we typically count 10 cubic meters per truckload, so that equals approximately 4,000 trucks of soil that would be brought to the property over the period of the agreement, which they have asked for it to be for a year. A part of the circulation of this would be to the Region of Durham. The Region of Durham will comment on whether or not we require security for the road or not, Shirley Road being a regional road, of course. We, in our agreement, we do outline haul routes to the, in the agreement for the owner and applicant. These haul routes, I have envisioned this haul route being Shirley Road to Simcoe both directions. It's something that we'll consider with them, so they'll be, would be coming and going out Shirley Road and coming from the, likely the south on Simcoe Street.
Okay, and I have many questions, but the rest I'll just, I'll save for another time, but you said we will be collecting all this information, legal names and haulers and commercial and that whole, all those bullets there. Who is going to monitor that, and is it our staff that has to do that? And if so, do we have staff to do it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a good question. So through the agreement process, one of the items in the bylaw is that they have to have a qualified person on site at all times when the fill is being imported to the site. They will be collecting the information from the haulers. They typically, when I spoke with Mr. Boyle about this application, I believe he said they would be using a small number of haulers as possible. I think at one point he said 2 or 3 to me. 2 or 3 haul companies. That keeps it organized. So they would be collecting that information, and then we have, it's a right within the agreement that we can inspect that at any time. And we certainly, obviously if we get a complaint or there is an issue that arises, we would definitely jump on that and do that inspection. Random inspections are the best.
So our site alteration doesn't state that we will review those items, and it is left to the qualified person as it's written right now?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what the bylaw states is that we require them to provide us with that information. I guess if we had a reason to put our own staff on, if we had sensed there was an issue with it or had notified an issue, then we could actually put either a staff member or a contracted person on the site to monitor it. That's something we could do. And we can include provisions for things like that in the agreement as well. If they were to somehow breach the agreement, that would be a step that we would take. Full-time supervision, which of course is costly.
And my final question, I'm sorry, I just thought of one last one, Mr. Mayor. The reason for the soil importation is, the way I look at the map, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's for the low point of that property off Graham Road. Is that correct? Like, I mean, it kind of goes down like this behind the cemetery there. Am I correct in that, or is it just to improve the type of soil that is there?
No, through Mr. Mayor, the application says that it is to fill in, if you will, a low-lying area within the pond. There is a small dip. If you go there, I did go by and see it. There is an area, a low area, and when you're looking at a large farm property, it doesn't look that very big, but when you measure it out, and that's where the volume and the height that the material has to raise up to make it level for better farming isn't really all that much, but it's because it's such a large area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My friend asked a lot of my questions, but I'm just going to follow up on a couple of them. You mentioned about you would be sending a notice out to all of the neighbors. How many of those neighbors, and how big of a range does this take in? Does this take in all of the people that live on Shirley Road, because they're going to have trucks roaring by their place, as well as Graham Road? And what happens if they decide to say, no, we don't want this, they're going to resist it? What do we do? 2 questions there for you.
I'll answer the first one first. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I actually envision sending out notices to everyone on Shirley Road from this site west all the way to Simcoe. The reason being, if that is in fact the haul route, we would want to make sure everybody that is living in front of that haul route, and there's not actually that many. We're not talking about hundreds of homes here. We're talking about a few usually farm front property on Shirley Road. So I believe that would be the best call for this, and that's what the agreement will outline. We will send out notices to those people. If they call in with questions on it, obviously we will do our best to help them understand the purpose of the application. And the reason that the farmer wants to do it, they're welcome obviously to contact him. They're his neighbors, and they likely know him quite well. So he can also reiterate the purpose of why he's doing what he's doing. We have to go by our bylaw, which gives people the right to apply for the permit to put fill on the property.
So my second question wasn't answered. So what happens, Lori, if they resist and they say no, and the whole works of them sign a petition and say, we don't want this to happen down the road from here?
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think then we would have to take a look at it and see if there was a reason that all of, or a lot, the majority of the people didn't want it to happen. I think for the most part, we can, staff together with the property owner could maybe give information to them that explains why it's being done. There may be things that we can improve in the agreement, if they're concerned about the truck traffic, things like that, hours of operation, dust, noise, things like that. We can maybe do things to help that out for them.
Talk to people in Green Bank and see what they think about 4,000 trucks that just went by their place, and find out what kind of truck drivers they are. And some of them are good, and some of them aren't so good. So that is a real concern to me. What happens if they begin their work on this property, and then everybody just says, hey, like what happened at Green Bank? We don't like this, and this is too much roaring of trucks. They're unsafe. They're doing unsafe maneuvers on our road. What do you do then? We've already approved it.
I'll tell you, Mr. Mayor, that the agreement's going to outline conditions for which the township can actually close down the site, can stop the importation of the fill and close down the site. Those conditions are designed to be in favor of the township. It really is, I don't want to use the term for any reason whatsoever, but if we have good reason to shut the site down, we will shut the site down. And it will be gated and locked, and that will be the end of the importation of the fill.
And what happens, just because that's a lot of trucks, what happens when the mud comes out on the road and it becomes unsafe to drivers on the road? Are we going to pay for that, or is this gentleman going to pay for it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is a regional road, but I know the region would like to participate in helping us with this agreement as far as mud control on the road. So they will have to install mud suppression, mud mat, that sort of thing. If the road needs to be cleaned, they'll be notified that the road needs to be cleaned, and they'll have a time limit. Typically, it needs to be cleaned that day, and that will be at the expense of the property owner, the applicant.
And will there be a sign up that is a flashing light that says trucks are turning ahead? Will the region be responsible for that, or will this gentleman be responsible for that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we will discuss that. I can discuss that with the region. It really is up to them, because Simcoe Street is also a regional road, so I'm not sure whether they will choose to implement that for this type of short term. I know it says a year, but it's a relatively short term of time for the trucks to be going on the road, and I can certainly discuss that with the region.
Okay, that's good. Now, if I may ask a couple more, thank you. Who is going to monitor the soil? You mentioned, Councillor Watton asked this question about the QP, and you did mention that we will try to monitor it, but what happens if some fill gets brought in and slips through and we don't know about it? What happens here? And we can't be out there 24/7 watching trucks coming in the middle of the night dumping soil.
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, there will be time of day that they will be allowed to import the soil to the site that the trucks can run. That's typically sometime between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's when somewhere in there we hit a window for importation of the soil. So there'll be no importing of the soil in the night. Our agreements require a gate to be installed that can be locked and shut down, so that you don't have sort of these rogue people coming in and just dumping soil at any time. And then with the qualified person being on site, that should curtail anybody coming along with sort of additional soil that they're just trying to get rid of.
That should curtail. That's the big question. I'm so frightened of Greenbank again, and this is why I'm really finding this very difficult to handle. Especially when we have contaminated soil and we don't know the QPs and we're not there to watch what is going on with the QPs. So that's what makes me very skeptical on this. In that area of the property regulated by KRCA, it says, you said low-lying land. What kind of low-lying land is that? Is that swampland, or is there a creek going through it, or is there, what's there? What is that land like?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, and possibly the property owner could help me with this, but it looked to me like it was an area of the property that maybe hadn't been farmed in the past, or farmed for maybe a specific purpose, a crop that he had been farming. And it had, just over time, when the soil isn't turned often enough or farmed, it has sat there and become like a low-lying area. You can see it out there. It's a dip. It's not, there's no creek or no pond there. It's just an area of the farm that's lower than any other area, and making it difficult for him to farm that. We could ask, if you would like, I could get the...
No, I'm going to leave that up to KRCA.
Okay.
And they will go through that one. I think that's all my questions right now, unless another one triggers my mind. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Back?
Thank you. Through the mayor, and I just did a quick calculation. If this really was to be going for a duration of a year, it's about 15 to 16 trucks a day, which is actually, I mean, trucks are on the road all the time, so I don't think that actually would be a significant impact. In Castle Harbor, in comparison, we're going to have 6,000 trucks in a matter of, 1 to 2 months? It's going to be complete and utter chaos. Good luck getting home, because you're on the way getting there as well. So, and many more homes in shorter distance. So I don't think that the amount of trucks over this spread out period will really harbor any problems for the residents. Hopefully not. Will this site alteration bylaw be similar to the one that was set up for the Castle Harbor, the former CDM site?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the agreement, the site alteration agreement that will be in place will actually be very similar in a lot of the ways. Of course, as you indicated, the duration of the permit and the way that it's being imported into the site will be different. But being that it's not our roads, it's a regional road that it's coming in and out of. But many aspects of the agreement are the same. That's sort of like a base agreement that we use, and we just tweak it to match the situation here. There are certain things that are a little different, like I said, the road being regional roads and things like that. But yes, the requirements are the same. They have to provide us with all of the same information.
And there were some changes or updates that you did with regards to the new changes from was it the Ontario government, or can you just speak to that? Because I think Councillor Somerville will appreciate those changes that Mrs. Fox added to our current site alteration bylaw, which hopefully will prevent future green banks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the change I believe that Councillor Back is speaking of is to do with a bill that was passed last year by the provincial government. The case used to be if there was a property that was regulated by the Conservation Authority and us, one or the other would provide the permit, not necessarily both. So it meant that there were times when the township possibly wouldn't have an opportunity to even comment on a fill property necessarily if they didn't send it to us, if the entire property was regulated, or if all of the fill was going into the regulated area, and vice versa. They wouldn't necessarily have been pulled into a site alteration application that we had. Now, what this bill has done is any property that has dual regulation, so it's regulated by us as well as a conservation authority, they have the opportunity, and they can ask for a permit in addition to our permit, and they run simultaneously, and they have their own agreement separate from our agreement. We do talk to each other and try to make sure that the things that they want are on ours and vice versa, but there are properties where there are two agreements in place.
Any other questions from council? Okay, I have a few. So we know that fill is a four-letter word in this township, so we don't want to make the assumption that this is going to be bad fill by any means, but we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence because of the history of our experience with fill. So some of the questions I have, which I've had answered, but I just want to clarify. You had mentioned the homes to the west on Shirley Road, but is your communication also going to the homes on the T in the east? That cluster, the main cluster of homes there?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, yeah, that, especially that row that is right there, they would definitely be, and possibly that large farm behind, when I look at it, that is what makes sense to me, that's where they would go.
Just wanted to make sure, because you'd said
Yes.
the houses to the west, I want to make sure that you... The bullet 2 says discussion, it says proposing import 33,000 cubic meters of soil that meets criteria of the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, OREG 15304. Does that specify the table of the soil? I know our agreement talks about the table, but I just know that I wanted to know what that was.
Mr. Mayor, that regulation, the Ontario Regulation 153/04, the MOE has in place, is one that is typically used by farm properties because it states the level of soil that is permitted, not permitted, but is recommended for this type of use. So it may involve, my report states 33 cubic meters of soil that meets that criteria, and then 7,000 cubic meters of topsoil. Together they will make up in a classification of soil that is recognized by the MOE as acceptable for a farm property such as this.
Okay, so what is the intent that we would be accepting for a table? The tests of the sites, the source sites for that, in the agreement?
So in the agreement, the wording from that regulation would be included in the agreement, and that's what we will ask our independent soils tests, and also expect their reports to read whether or not it has met that level.
Okay, so I'll come back to this one because I think this might involve a question to to Boyle Excavating or the property owner. So the agreement, and this is the resolution that we have, the recommended resolution has the report to be received, but also an authorization to sign and the site alteration agreement. And just to clarify, this communication of the residents and this preparation of the site alteration agreement, is this agreement then coming back to council, or is this then to be decided by yourself and staff and with the response there and then us sign? I just didn't know what to explain to residents if they have concerns and we get updated. I want it to be a transparent process, but also to make sure that the residents that have their say, that there's a mechanism for them to be answered. And I know don't want to add more meetings onto this or delays, but I do want to make sure that given the sensitivity of fill in the township, that we do make sure that we take the extra steps.
So I'm sorry, I sort of lost your first point there.
I
apologize.
Go back to the question is, the process, because I didn't quite get the answer from before, was from the point when the residents have an opportunity, where they receive information on this, they have an opportunity to express their concerns or ask questions. how is that being packaged up and being, so that we know that it's been taken care of, or that if there's a complaint down the road for whatever reason, somebody's concerns, like, there's wells, those are all well properties in there, and I know that this is, surface water, that it would affect, minimal effect of drainage, but just in case somebody's asking, because I'm sure those are the questions that we will get, is should they test their wells beforehand, before this happens or not, and because last thing we want is anybody saying that, they weren't informed that they should do this, and there would be a baseline test or something, and it'd be like an added insurance that we don't foresee there'd be anything there, but it's a free test to go get your water tested, so would it be advisable in the communication? That also protects us as the township too, so they got the results ahead of time, and then, if there were any issues with wells before the fill came in there, if somebody gets a test, they're not going to point the finger at the fill saying that, oh, it's after the fill came in that we had issues.
The intention for the plan for the agreement would be that staff will work on an agreement. We will also provide a copy of it, a preliminary copy of it, to the applicant as well, just so they're aware of everything that's being asked of them. Should council agree with this report this evening, that our next step will be to create that mirror and get that sent out so we can get the comments from area residents. Once an agreement has been worked out between the township staff and the applicant, that agreement will come to the mayor and clerk to be signed. It wouldn't come back to council. It will come back to the mayor and clerk to be signed and I can certainly provide you with all that background information of any of the concern the residents had.
Okay, and I asked this question to you already, but it might be beneficial to reiterate it, is about the planned stockpiling and the testing and the release and I know it touches on it on the report, but I think that's important for that process to be, reiterated here. If you could just kindly touch on that.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. The plan is for all fill sites, really, is to have an area where some stockpiling happens. And the reason we need to stockpile it is because of the amount of time that it takes for these reports to come back from the soils tester. We don't get them a very quick turnaround for these. So what we have want to put in these agreements is that the soil that's imported to the site, and this one's a little bit different because it is over a longer amount of time, but once an amount of soil is in the stockpile, let's say it's decided, in this case it's a month or weeks, before they spread it, that's when we will go and actually take our independent soils tests from it. They won't be permitted to spread it until we have tested it and our tests have come back. That way, at all times, we'll know where that stockpile, where that soil, if it comes back, that there's a reason that it can't stay on the site, we'll know that the stockpile that it's in, and they will have to actually remove it from the site. Then once, assuming the testing comes back fine, and the material they brought to the site is what they said they were going to bring to the site, and what it was tested as before it was removed from the source site, then they would be permitted to spread the material.
Okay, the traffic management plan you touched on, and that would be, you already mentioned, stay on the regional roads. Obviously, the owner of the property is, well, I read this, it's not Boyle Excavating, they're acting as the agent or the applicant.
Right, Mr. Hoskin is
right.
So
Mr. Hoskin is still responsible for whatever goes on his property, and being agricultural land, I'm sure he doesn't want anything that's contaminated on his land either, but it's just inadvertently that contamination is there, or something happens, then we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence on this. One of the other questions I had was deliveries, do we, in the new site alteration agreement, allow for time of delivery on Saturdays? I know you said 7 to 7, Monday to Friday, or I don't know if you said the days of the week. I just was wondering if Saturday was one of the parameters, only because I know that was an issue with other areas too, and I don't know the other agreements that have been done lately, if Saturdays have been kept out of it.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there have been other agreements, smaller agreements, not to these sizes, where we have not permitted importation on the weekends or on holidays as well. We'll discuss that with the property owner and see if that's something that he wants to pursue, but typically our agreements are for Monday to Friday.
Okay, that, I would prefer that too, just because it makes it so there's people who have the weekends off, and if there's, just happens to be, there's some excavation happening, and there happens to be not 16 trucks, because it may not be spread, it might be 50 trucks that day, and it happens to be on a Saturday starting at 7 in the morning, and the windows are open, it's hot, and people don't have air conditioning, and then the phone calls and the emails to happen, and then it'll be me that it'll all funnel to, and that's why I want to make sure we head these off, so it makes it easier or more palatable to control these parameters. So, obviously, because this is in the area where it is, and the wells and the adjacent, the other two applicants which we'll be talking about are in the urban area, and it's a little bit different. It's still, we want to do our due diligence, but I just want to make sure that we're covering off everything. So, Councillor Watton, you had your question up there? Hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one, and I don't really want to keep beating a dead horse, but is there a timeline that site alteration agreement has to be signed once the application comes in? Like, do we have 30 days to sign it? Do we have 10 days? What is the rule for that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is nothing in this bylaw that has a time limit like that, thankfully, so we can take a bit of our time. I know we're dealing with their time as well.
Absolutely.
But if I need the time, or staff needs the time to review information, seek out other opinions, we can do that. We'll work as fast as we can, but we're not going to forget things or try to rush through things.
I was more concerned with the response from the neighboring properties, like if it took us 2 weeks to get the letter out and it took 2 weeks to get the letter back, would we run out of time for having this? So, having said that, can we put a timeline on a response from those neighbors so that, before, like, I have to respect that you don't want to delay if everything is copacetic and so on, but I do believe that if the neighbors do have comment, we should have a timeline where they can speak to it, we can be aware of it, and, if it's something earth-shattering that we go, oh no, that we don't have that signed agreement signed yet. That's my only concern. So, if you can take that into consideration, please.
Councillor Somerville?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. Ms. Fox, you're just getting beaten up here, but...
That's okay.
You mentioned about the stockpiles, and that just made me think another thing. The stockpiles they go at quite a height. Do you do boreholes in these to make sure that down underneath we don't have some contaminated soil?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be an independent soils consultant that will go out and do the testing. I have seen this done on other properties, and they do dig in pretty far. But unfortunately, there really isn't a way to test every little square inch of it. There just isn't.
No, of course not, but
right.
Like what we did in Green Bank.
Right. They do dig in. These stockpiles are not the type of stockpiles like from Green Bank. Councillor Back did the math, and she said 15 trucks or something a week. So, that if you could picture what 15 loads are going to look like, it's not a very big pile. And then they'll dig in and take a few samples in. Doing it this way, though, means that there could you know, there could have been one small part of one small load that had a little something in it. They would have to take that entire stockpile out because we wouldn't know where it is. Of course, you know, I don't anticipate that happening, but should it happen, we are not going to get down to the nitty-gritty of this can stay and this cannot. That whole stockpile would have to go.
Well, how often do they go out to do the stockpile?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we actually have spoken with a few different consultants, 3 or 4 consultants, to get pricing on soils testing as well as what their opinion is on projects of different sizes and how often they're recommending going out and testing. It really depends. Something like this that is really just maybe a few loads a day, or there could be a time when they have more loads in a week just because the supply is there. I think it would be anywhere from a couple to several times a week, just depending on, really it depends on how much is coming in. There may be, in the case of this one here, there could be a few weeks go by where they haven't, obviously nothing come in, and then they would start up again, notify us, and then we would notify our soils consultant.
Thank you. And my other thought is, with Scugog Line 3 being right, the back of that property being right against Scugog Line 3, did you think of maybe sending a letter to those residents as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we could do that. We could send it to, especially, you know, the adjoining property there, and maybe the one beside it. I think when it gets to a certain amount of space away where, obviously they're not going to be bothered by the noise if they're far enough away. It's hard to judge with this, as the mayor said, in the urban area, it's a little bit easier. You can do a radius and you know who you're going to catch, but with the rural properties, you know, the truth is, further down to the west towards Simcoe Street, they won't be bothered by this operation other than the odd truck that goes by, but they should still be notified, and we definitely can look at notifying the people behind.
Well, there should be a truck route as well.
There will be.
Yeah, right. Okay, so they shouldn't be using, the odd truck should not be using Line 3.
No, none will.
No, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other first-time questions? Councillor Batt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is the township receiving a tipping fee for the amount?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Federal Alteration Bylaw and Fees and Charges Bylaw identifies fees that are involved with a site alteration permit. So for permits that are over 500 cubic meters, the fee for just the permit fee is $2,500. And then we also collect $2 per cubic meter of fill that is brought to the site. That is the tipping fee. They're also, of course, responsible for paying any of the other associated fees, the testing, anything like that. The owner of the property is responsible for that.
Okay, so my point in asking that is with regards to having an independent consultant randomly coming and testing these stockpiles. Ideally, each stockpile before it's spread should be an expected cost to that landowner importing the fill, because we want to ensure each and every stockpile is clean and we don't end up, because we have had other instances in this township other than Green Bank where fill has come in on a farmland that's not ideal. So we want to ensure that we're preventing that.
Any other questions? Okay, I do have a question. There is a representative, the owner and the representative from Boyle Excavating are here, right? Yes. Yeah, maybe if you just come up to the mics here, just because I think this is important to just ask. Maybe just press the buttons on the base of the mic and introduce yourself, just so that we know who's whom.
I'm Norm Hoskin. I own the farm. Dave Boyle.
Dave Boyle. Address 2663 Concession Road 8, Bowmanville. Been a contractor in the area for 45 years. I can maybe answer some of the questions.
That's why I wanted to give you the opportunity, because I know I asked this question this morning, I know the township has dealt with you, and I figured if you have, reputable name in the Durham region area, and I looked at your website, and I know it's not a small company, and I know it's, you wanna keep your name, highly reputable, and obviously, Mr. Hoskin, you don't want anything on your land, you don't want any issues, you don't want neighbors or residents, so just that comfort of giving you the opportunity to speak.
Okay, I guess, just to go back on the fill issue, it's become a major problem the last 5 years. Going back, say 20 years ago, I did all the work at the University in Oshawa, and from about 2001 on, we've always done our own soil sampling because of these issues, that we could see them coming down the pike because of all the Toronto activity that was coming out to our areas. So, for University, when that was built, I moved about 800,000 meters to a farm north Oshawa. Never had any issues at all with the city of Oshawa, with Durham region. We worked with them the whole site. All the soil was tested. It was only my source of fill that went there. Any fill site that we do, it's only my source. So whatever job I tender on and bid on, generally in the Durham region, we're local. So that's where the fill's coming from. Since then, last year, we, as a company, we were core certified. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that, but the municipalities now are saying if you're not a core certified contractor, you can't work in the area, or you can't work for them. But in the core certification, what it's forced our company to do is we got a system called Site Docs, and so everybody that works for us every day, they have to log in to the program. We have to do an internal audit once a year. The government does a formal audit every third year. So every day, wherever we work, whatever we're doing is documented. If there's 10 loads of fill goes from that job site, it's documented where it come from, where it went to, where the soil was tested at both ends. So the documentation will be there. We have to retain that documentation for our audits. So, the industry has changed a lot. Going forward, I can still see a lot of problems because we're still getting a lot of contaminated fill out of Toronto. Every weekend, we're getting it dumped on open roads and farm fields. And I can tell you an incident we had here 2 months ago that contaminated soil was rigged so bad, but gas got dumped, on a farmer's on open road beside his land. But, the police can't do it, the bylaw, they just don't have the people policing it to do that. And because of our location, we're so close to the Toronto market, I can see it getting worse. Another thing that I'm not real happy with, we go to to meet farm criteria, like table 1, table 2. Table 2 means a certain sodium level. It has to meet a sodium level to go to agricultural land. Anything after table 2, table 3 is what we call, contaminated soil. The problem is with that, it's going to transfer stations. They're reloading it, shipping it back out to some other dump sites. And there's another dump site that makes Green Bank look pretty small right now. And it's a lot of contaminated stuff going in there. And it's ruining not just for your township, for the whole province of Ontario. It's going to be a real big problem. For us as a contractor, to stay in business, I've dumped in agriculture land for 45 years, and if we can't find properties to dump, where do we go with the fill? It's an issue for everybody right now. Clarington, we've got applications into Clarington, it's like, where do we go to the fill if we get a job here, And this is going to be the big issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the other thing is too, we only work 7 to 5:30, that's our hours of operation, Monday to Fridays. We don't work Saturdays, we don't work Sundays or Mondays or holidays. If there was an occasion come up where we had to work a Saturday, we'd be giving somebody a couple weeks' notice or calling you and say, this is the situation. You'd be well notified, and it'd be yea or nay. And that's the way we operate.
Okay, were there any questions from council for the opponent? Okay, I just thought it was very important because of the sensitivity around Phil and the township and throughout the region now, so that we gave the opportunity to answer some of the questions. And one last question I had here is, what would be an example of a source site that you may be working on or anticipate to be working on that would be providing that or significant?
Well, right now, for example, I've got work priced right now at Durham College. I've got UOIT, we call it. Now I still refer to it as Durham College. I do have a job right now at Gerard and Taunton Road. The only soil I have coming off there is about 3,000 meters of topsoil. That won't go till after half loads, of course. But, it'll be tested at the source.
Right.
And, we're bidding work all the time right now.
Not like the old battery plant for GM or anything like that, right?
Well, yes, there's homes for that too. It should be going to Sarnia, not a transfer station in Pickering.
Okay, no, that's good. I think that's very important to have the opportunity to ask those questions. So if there aren't any other questions for Ms. Fox or Mr. Hoskin or it's Mr. Boyle, is it then?
That's correct,
Okay.
yes.
And then we have a recommended motion that's here that is moved by Councillor Watt and seconded by Councillor Somerville, that the report COMS 2018-09 site alteration agreement 2371 Shirley Road be received, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a site alteration agreement with the owners of 2371 Shirley Road to permit the importation of fill to increase the workability of a farm on the property. Any other comments or questions on that motion? Okay, all those in favor? Carried. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So,
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So that's the first one. So now, so we go to the second one. Do you have a higher level? I know we've got the report that are here. Okay.
You can take a break if you like.
4 to 9.
All right. Oh, that clock is wrong?
Yeah.
I'll try to fix it.
All right, so yes, for the benefit of staff and here, I think that we should take a short, even if it's a 7-minute leg stretch, so that we can come back here. Okay, we'll continue on with the reports, Ms. Fox. Now, just for 11.4, is the next one we're on, for 1547A Taylor Ford application. Just a very high level, I mean, we have the report before us, so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of council, this will be much shorter. Everything that we spoke about with that first application applies to this one as well, as far as the testing and all of that stuff. Just a little bit of information on what this is about. If you're familiar with this property, it's right across the road from the Walmart, and there is a stockpile there now. That material was dug out to create that ditch that drains the Walmart commercial property to the stormwater management pond, which is south of there. You can see it on the photo. So what they plan on doing is putting that ditch, that drainage ditch into a pipe system, and then obviously filling the ditch in with that existing stockpiled material. They've measured the stockpile. They're a little short on that. They need to import 5,500 cubic meters, and then they suspect there is approximately 6,000 cubic meters that's currently in that stockpile. Obviously, they're going to go through everything that I mentioned as far as the agreement, just because of the volume. They require an agreement through the township. The reason we're here as well is because they're asking to be able to do this work in advance of their site plan agreement. Taylor Ford has submitted a site plan agreement to build a dealership on that side of the road, and that is going through our processes now. That property is currently zoned C2-1. With a holding zone on it. So they have a little bit of planning stuff they have to go through before they can get that, and we see an opportunity now to maybe do some preliminary work to the property before they get their site plan in place.
Okay, thank you very much for that quick update. Questions from council? I think everybody exhausted the questions on the last round, so...
Thank you, the owner and their representatives are here, if anybody had any questions for them as well.
Yeah, I will just make a comment. I know that this is going under site plan, and that you know, the gateway and from the west and the stockpile that has been there and the open field, it's nice to see that this is being developed from, you know, a local business that's expanding, and we obviously wish them all the success, and it'll be more of an attractive entrance into the community. So obviously, same as the questions before, and the due diligence done by the township and the owners of the property, so happy to see that this development is moving forward. Councilor Somerville, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question, Lori. That existing ditch that's there, and they're going to fill that in with this existing stockpile, I guess. How much did you say was in the existing stockpile? 500 or 5,000? I think it's 500.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the existing stockpile has cubic meters of fill. That's a good example of what 6,000 cubic meters of fill looks like, is that stockpile that's there.
Okay, so are they going to take that in, are they going to put a drainage pipe in that ditch, existing ditch, and then cover it up, or what are they going to do?
Mr. Mayor, yes, that's what they're going to do. They're going to implement a pipe system underground for that.
Okay, and what's that other funny little line that comes through there, just over by the existing stockpile to the east of that one, next to Brooks Farm?
Mr. Mayor, there's a roadway, actually driveway, that goes down to the pond there. That's the access way to access the pond for maintenance.
So is that for township?
Correct.
So that's going to remain?
Not in its current configuration, but there will be an access that will remain, yes.
All right. So they're going to bring 6,000, did I say? 6,000 in?
No, they're importing
500.
Yeah, they're importing.
And so, again, I'm going to ask that this is a MTO road. Are they going to make sure that the dirt is cleaned off the road and that we do not have any unsafe drivers, or we don't have unsafe gravel truck, or the truck drivers too? This will all be in the contract.
Through Mr. Mayor, yes, we will circulate our information to MTO for them to provide comments to be part of our agreement. I have dealt with MTO on a few other projects prior to my time here, and that would not be allowed to happen on their road. They will be on top of that.
So MTO hasn't been approached yet about this?
Through Mr. Mayor, yeah, I did have a quick conversation with a representative of MTO just to let them know about the project, and just to make sure that they would indeed need to be circulated on it. And so, just to get that contact, but they have not yet actually been circulated.
Yeah, okay. Because I'm just wondering how much they're going to be in favor of that too, because if it's coming in on that, they have their rules and regulations as well, so we all know that. Again, we get tipping fees on this, I guess, too, do we?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the fee for the application is $2,500. Each of the applicants you're seeing this evening have paid that $5,500 or $2,500 already, excuse me, and then $2 per cubic meter for anything imported. So in this case, the material that they're moving around on the lot, there's not a fee with that, but any imported material is $2 per cubic meter.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Back?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lori, can you tell me where the entrance will be from the trucks? Is it going to be exactly where the light is to go to Walmart, but on the south side, or is it going to be prior to that? I'm just wondering for traffic flow. Through you, Mr. Mayor, that will actually be decided by MTO. That's one of the things that they will let us know. I know the applicant has submitted in their site plan for the dealership, that obviously the entrance to the dealership and to the site would be opposite, right at the lights there. But for the importation of the fill and construction equipment, I don't know. It will be up to MTO to decide what it will be. Great, thank you. And I'd like to echo the mayor's comments with regards to it's exciting to see a large Ford dealership in the mix. And I know one of the gentlemen there met my daughter a few months ago, and actually this March break we had to go to dealers in Uxbridge and in Oshawa Whitby because she's in the market for a car, although she's 9. And she she loved this Ford dealership, so she will be more than thrilled that it will be a larger one. And she knew all the trucks and ones, I don't know if you remember that, with all the tipping and ones that are tow trucks, and it's ridiculous. But she has plans on working there one day in the future, so she'll be more than thrilled to know that there's going to be a large Ford dealership in town.
Any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, we have recommended motion moved by Councillor Back, seconded by Councillor Guido, that the reports COMS 2018-010 Site Alteration Agreement 1540 Highway 7A Taylor Ford be received, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the site alteration agreement with the owners of 1540 Highway 7A to permit the importation of fill in advance of the site plan agreement. Any questions on that? All those in favor? Carried. All right, next, final one.
Next, Mayor and members of council, this is COMS 2018-11. Much like the last one, this is, really, it is site alteration for the Geranium Homes Canterbury project. They require fill for their Phase 1, where I've indicated Phase 1 on the map area, and they understand that they have an excess of material up in the seniors block. This is all owned by, obviously, the same company. Geranium Homes owns this entire property. The reason we are here is just for a little bit of a technicality because of where property lines are located. This counts as two separate properties. Otherwise, if it was all one property, we wouldn't be here because it would just be moving a cut and fill operation through a site, and they wouldn't require council approval. It's just because of the location of property lines. The good thing about this, at least I believe it is that the site, some of the material that they're going to be using for this Phase 1 development is coming from within the township and within their own site. So this would be, obviously, the haul route for this is going to be out in Simcoe Street in Coulter. That would be the haul route. I can see it being, we will take security for Coulter Street just to make sure that road is maintained to our standards, and also to make sure that it's always kept clean and free of mud and dust. Obviously, a haul route will be indicated for them, which can tell you will be Simcoe and Coulter Street. They will not be permitted any trucks to come through the development site, the existing development.
Questions from council? Councillor Back?
Hello. I have quite a few. In the past, when we had the initial plan for Geranium, we had engineers retired engineers that live in Canterbury Common, and determined that the soil or the fill that's on the golf course is not suitable for foundations. So what would this, and this is part of, it's not so much a stockpile as it's part of the former golf course. And so this, yes, so this fill technically is not suitable as it is currently for foundations. So what would have to be done to this soil in order for it to be suitable for either the roads that will go through there or for foundations, or will it be used for something else?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. If, when they did do the testing and identified there are, as usual, maybe different pockets of material that's within that stockpile, but they did do some borehole testing, and if it is not found to be suitable for foundations or even road base, they can be used for backfill in the lots as well. And for landscaping, if it, let's say, it indicated that it was a lot of topsoil content, they will require a lot of topsoil for that area as well. So this material, they know they need it. They have tested, they've done some preliminary testing to see what the makeup is, and they're confident that that material they can use all of it over in that Phase 1 area, and they likely will not be for foundations or even for a road base, but certainly for backfilling of the buildings, around the buildings.
And if it is deemed to be a heavily percentage of top fill, topsoil, pardon me, more than what would be for that Phase 1 cul-de-sac, would they then stockpile that for the future topsoil for the other phases? Because, I mean, to purchase topsoil is expensive to begin with. This could be beneficial for the developer to have such excess topsoil. Would they do that, or how do we know that that topsoil is going where it should and it's not being mixed in? And, I mean, you know as I do that that can turn, when you have organic matter, it can be a recipe for disaster.
So through Mr. Mayor, and there are representatives of the for joining in here, as well as their consultant is here. They will be permitted to move material off of that area site and bring it down to the Coulter Phase 1 site, only the amount that they can use there. The rest of it would have to remain up there. So they'll do their testing of it, their significant testing, know how much of that material they need, and that's what they'll be permitted to move over to Phase 1.
And so any access they would then stockpile close to the place where they're digging?
It'll be up there.
Okay, and I have a few more, bear with me. So approximately how many trucks will this be of the 10,000 some odd cubic meters?
So through Mr. Mayor, 10,800 cubic meters is about 1,100, give or take, trucks.
Okay, and is there a time frame for when this will begin?
Through Mr. Mayor, much like the property in the north that we spoke of earlier, they're going to want to get this going and get it done in a shorter span of time. This is not something that's going to take a year to do. They'll want to get it done. As we're aware, there's some construction that's going to be happening at the intersection of Reach and Simcoe. So they'll want to make sure that they're not interfering with that or making it much more of a difficult haul for them waiting for that to get through that construction. So this will happen in a fairly short time, which will obviously be laid out in the agreement.
So from that, are those two fill sites, in a sense, going to be staggered, the one on Castle Harbor and this one? Because if there's 6,000 and 1,100 more on Simcoe, I mean, it's just going to be crazy town.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the great thing about having an agreement is that we can actually put start dates and end dates, and as I mentioned, the representative from Germany is here this evening too. So we do have a few of these sites that are ongoing. We're an area where there's some growth happening and a lot of construction, and so we will take a look at who goes first and who goes second, and that's what will happen. Obviously, road safety is very important. The region's going to be involved with this. They've been involved with that property to the north. They'll also be involved with this not only for the property to the north, but because of that construction that's going on. So there'll be fairly strict time frames for this.
I would appreciate that, because it'll be almost unbearable for people that have to use Simcoe. Is there a possibility on Coulter that we can place no parking signs when the duration of this, the loads come in? Because, as you know, there are cars that park on Coulter, and if you have cars there, plus big trucks, plus people that actually have to come out, this may make it a little bit easier or safer for those that use Coulter?
Yep, through Mr. Mayor, we definitely can look at that, and part of the correspondence and communication consideration is, again, to notify, obviously, that residents association and also the villa property to the south of this, because that, what you're talking about, that no parking in Coulter would directly affect them. We want to make sure they know about it and are aware of the timelines for it. All of that would be set in place.
So for the truck route, they would enter off of Simcoe onto Country Estates and back out onto Simcoe south and then to Coulter, out to Coulter and hopefully south then? Okay.
Correct.
So no going through the subdivision?
Not permitted.
Please make sure there is clear communication, because your phones will be ringing the first truck that goes through the wrong direction, I assure you. Please make sure that that happens. Is there going to be a time as well, this is as you know, a senior community. They are home during the day. You know, at 7 o'clock in the morning, rouse when you have people in their mid-80s to early 90s could be quite disturbing. Could we see a little bit of a softening of those hours just for the sake of the age of the community there?
You can work with the residents association to keep that into consideration.
I'd really appreciate that, thank you. How long will this take?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess it really depends on how quickly we can get the agreement in place, and I know we do have, as you know, half loads on right now, so if we got this agreement in place in advance of the half load being lifted, we would have to decide if it was beneficial to allow them to go ahead and get this going before that. That's something we could consider. We haven't made a decision on that. Time is important with this, not only for the developer, but as you said, because of the other projects that we have going on in town that we're going to need sort of road space for. So,
I mean, I would assume because there's not much travel time between where you're filling and where you're dumping, it's going to be beneficial, and it'll just be how quick those excavators...
It could be in as little as a couple to 3 weeks, depending, of course, on weather and things like that, of a duration of time. I think the intention is to be the project, not for them to be doing a little bit of that and then moving on to something else, to get that part of it done. Obviously, they need to get some equipment floated on site, and obviously some erosion control measures in as well, which we can, permit them to do as well. So, that's what I would expect it to be.
So now, they're going to be cutting into this hole, or this hill. Will there be a large hole there? And if there is a large hole, will it be flattened, or will there be proper fencing? I'd hate to see something happen because of adventurous kids in the summer going into a large hole, waiting to have a building built.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, because we are actually, on this property and within the township, we have the source site and also the receiving site. So we can, within that agreement, we can actually put stipulation in for both. So obviously fencing, erosion sediment control for that, they are aware of that will require some sort of matting or something in place for that to make sure that if we need a big storm, that mud doesn't just come right out on. And depending on how long that site is left, typically what happens is they go ahead and they'll seed it with something just to stabilize that ground, and that's what I would expect our agreement to say.
Okay, and I know that you received the 2 memos or the emails from the Canterbury residents, the engineers, so I won't go, for sake of time, over those, but I do hope that you do perhaps set a meeting up with them, discuss this perhaps with the engineer, the representatives from Geranium, just to ensure these concerns that they have of the fill, and it's not the quality of the fill, it's just the actual makeup of the fill, are addressed. And I won't go into that for now for the sake of time, but thank you.
Yes. Any other questions from Ms. Fox? Okay, I will just ask a couple. I know that you, Laura, you've been in contact with the Residents Association. I know we do as a township, and I think the representatives from Geranium, you mentioned that you are planning to or are in contact with the Residents Association because of the sensitive nature of, the development and infill, and this is like kind of like the first test that's going through, and how we work and communicate with them and make sure they have a voice, and that we're doing everything to mitigate any of the concerns or minimize any of the effects, while knowing still that this is inevitable, that is going to happen. So I just wanted to make sure that we're doing that. Also, I have my annual address to the Canterbury Commons Association this Thursday, so I know I'm going to get riddled with questions and comments and concerns. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, and being very open and transparent, and opportunities for voice, but we know that this is moving forward, and we'll just do it to the best of our abilities. The Hall route was talked about. I think that, the big concern I see is just Simcoe Street and the reconstruction and all this widening that's happening and the lights, and we don't know if if there is going to be any, if there's not going to be a planned detour by the region, then we're dealing with a lot of trucks and what direction they're coming from, and so this will be part of the plan is the route for, well, the route's coming through, but if, for whatever reason, if we have to have a backup plan, if I don't know if if there's going to be stoppage of traffic, or if it makes it so that you've got trucks planned, like there needs to be some sort of communication or contacts at the region if they plan on doing something where it's going to really backlog traffic, but that was the day that they wanted to move 50 trucks from point A to point B, and it's going to take them, a ridiculous amount of time to sit there and idle to go around there. It's going to be very unproductive. So I don't know if there's a contact that you give the representatives from Geranium, or if if the region even communicates to that level, if they know there's going to be certain work, because what I've heard is it's a long project and it's going to be bottlenecking traffic, and this is obviously not the ideal time to be doing any of the hauling on that route, but it is what it is. So is there, I guess getting back to my question, is there a contact in the region that you can provide to Geranium?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there is. Definitely, the region obviously is going to be circulating aware of this application and the timeframes. I'll discuss that with Geranium to see what the ideal timeframes are. I think the sooner that we can get going on this one, the better it will be for all of that stuff in the area. So definitely, that's something I can provide.
And just to make sure that it's aware, whomever you're speaking with at the region is also, when it's circulating, that it gets circulated to the people that are also
working on this
responsible for
project.
the construction. Yeah. I think that pretty much sums it up. As long as the communication is there and the opportunity is there. I know Councillor Back has a question, but same thing, to me, it's the same as the first discussion we're talking about, that the residents and the close residents, well, the Canterbury Common Residents Association will be the voice, I'm sure, for that, and those comments will be part of the agreement to make sure that, for example, same thing, like if Saturdays were planned on being used, but the residents really don't want Saturday, and it's something that we say, well, you know what, let's make it easier by not having Saturdays, then I hope that is communicated, and it's before they get an opportunity to provide input as soon as possible, so that we can not have so many things happening at once. Councillor Back?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where's the soil in the existing part where that Phase 1, where's that going? Because they're not going to just start, that also was part of a golf course, and the same situation of the mix of a lot of topsoil. Where is that existing? They can't just put this soil on top and start building. So where is this soil in that Phase 1 that they're going to be importing it to? Are they going to dig out that first and take it somewhere else on the property? Where's that going?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that's correct. They will strip the topsoil in Phase 1, and that amount of topsoil that's in there has been included in their calculations of how much soil they need from the other area that they're going to be retrieving the soil from. So they have an estimate of how much topsoil is there, and that will stay within that area.
Any other questions from council? All right. I just want to make sure I give the same opportunity from the representatives of Geranium. Is there anything that you wanted to add or bring to our attention?
Just that we have been in touch with the residents.
Well, just maybe come to the mic just to make sure we...
Just that we have been in touch with the Residents Association throughout the process, and we'll continue to do so. We've already had a meeting with all of the residents adjacent to the development area and explained what our haul route would be, the measures that we are putting in place to mitigate the impact on them.
You mentioned fencing. We are putting in kind of extra measures above and beyond what is typically required, which is a 6-foot security fencing around the entire site, as well as the erosion sediment control measures. So things like that we have gone through with them at the end of January. They've asked us to have another meeting with them as well before earthworks start, so we are happy to do that as well.
Okay. Any questions from council for Drainage reps? Okay. All right, we know it's a sensitive issue, and we know that they will be very vocal for the concern, so if you can, do the best to keep everybody happy, that makes everybody's life a lot easier, so... So we have moved by Councillor Back, seconded by Councillor Somerville, the recommended motion, report COMS 2018-011, site alteration agreement, Canterbury Geranium Homes be received, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a site alteration agreement with Geranium Homes to permit the importation of fill in advance of the subdivision agreement. Any questions? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. No more fill applications for the rest of the term. So next up, we have the Canada Day update. I don't know if there's no report. I mean, it speaks for itself. We have it moved by Councillor Drew, seconded by Councillor Watton. The recommended motion that it be celebration update be received, and that the council deem the 2018 Canada Day celebration an event of municipal significance, and the requirement to submit a criminal background check in the bylaw 4814 and bylaw 1915 for Canada Day vendors be waived. Questions on it? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next up is sidewalk. I don't know if this also, if there are questions from council, but moved by Councillor Back, seconded by Councillor Guido, the recommended motion, sidewalk and curb installation replacement contract award be received. Contract for the sidewalk and curb installation and replacement in the amount of $157,507.76, including HSD, be awarded on to On-Site Contract Inc. Any comments you wanted to make, Ms. Coleman, Director Coleman?
I'm just happy it came in under our budget, and we've checked the references for the contractor, and they're good, so.
Excellent. So, and questions, Councillor Guido?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All of council has been provided with a fantastic map of the location of the sidewalk repairs. I had asked this question to Kevin last week regarding public notification of this. If that's one of the many questions that I do get from residents is, where's my sidewalk on the list of priorities? So if we can ensure that this is promoted through social media and put on our website to direct residents to find out if their sidewalk has made this year's budget cut.
That's good. Any other questions from council? I just want to comment that I think, the crack ceiling and expanding on that, and am I on the right report here? That's the next report.
Next one.
I looked at my comment here and I missed it. So at the sidewalk, I'll just comment on the maps there. I had asked about whether this was, because it was 2017 budget, and then where was the 2018 budget, and I know that we have significant requirements for the regional rehabilitation of Simcoe Street, et cetera, so it answered my question for the 2018, but maybe, I don't know if you wanted to provide just a quick update to where the 2018 budget is being
Sure,
earmarked.
Mr. Mayor. Yes, this is a 2017 budget. We did tender it in the fall of 2017, and the prices came in high, and that we didn't get very many bids, maybe only one, I can't remember. So we didn't award it because it wasn't good value for the township. We re-tendered and got it under budget. So this is a 17 budget, and the 2018 budget includes the work with the Simcoe and Reach construction by the region, which is a new sidewalk on the west side of Simcoe from Beach Street to Reach Street, a new multi-use path on the east side along the same stretch of Simcoe, and a new multi-use path along Reach Street from Simcoe to Bigelow.
That's good. Yes, very good. Councillor Back?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Coleman, when will this project start? The sidewalk, or will it be just during the summer?
Assuming it gets approved next week by council, we'll be awarding the contract right away. I'm hoping that it will have a May start. They'll wait till the half loads are over, but hopefully it will start in May.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, it's already been moved. Any comments on the motion? No. All those in favor? Carried. Next is moved by Councilor Back, second by Councilor Guido, the COM 2018-022 route haul hot lance and seal contract award be received, and that the contract for route hot lance and seal in the amount of $42,917.40 be awarded to 222-8977 Ontario Inc., operating as RAN Maintenance. Questions? That's where my comment was. I was saying kudos, I'm glad to see the crack sealing is expanding, and one of my questions was if do you foresee there ever being an opportunity that we can expand more crack sealing? Because I see as we drive around, there's a lot of roads that need work, and they're the point of they need rehabilitation, but also the roads that are still good, but they have cracks in it, and then moisture gets into it, and I just thought it's a cheaper way to extend them if we need to increase the budget. And I don't know if something comes under budget, will this contract allow for us to extend it? I don't know if there's any provisions for that, or is there going to be an opportunity for us to maybe get some more?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, so that was one of our successes with the operating budget. We were able to double the length of crack sealing that we could do this year, which I think is very important to preserving our asphalt. So we went from 10,000 to 20,000, and we're still under our planned budget of $50,000, so we can probably issue a change order to the contractor and extend and do even more crack sealing this year.
Okay, that's great. And then the slurry seal part of the that is still in the budget. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's still to be tendered, or is that already, that's tendered with, we already tendered that?
The slurry seal?
Yeah.
Sorry.
When I referenced out of the item 3, okay, the available budget, it referenced the 200,000 minus the 38, there was 161 remaining, and it said the remainder of the budget will be utilized to procure slurry seal treatment on page 55.
Right. Yes, Mr. Mayor, so some of that was tendered last year. About $80,000 worth of slurry seal was tendered last year. We did it early in the year, but the contractor, there's not many that do it, and they didn't get to Scugog because it was a relatively small contract. So because it's operating budget, it has to come out of this year's operating budget. But the remaining $70,000 we're planning for slurry seal, we'll still need to tender that. Or perhaps if we like the rates and when this contractor provides good service, we can extend that contract as well.
Okay, and I just, it'd be, I guess, if you get the opportunity, or if we are doing slurry seal, if there's a plan for it, just to know where it's going, just for the benefit of us.
I don't have the list of the ones we tendered in 2017 for the slurry seal, but the slurry seal for 2018 will be this section of Scugog Line 6 from Highway 12 westwards that we did a new surface treatment on last year to protect that work we did last year.
Right. Okay, great. Any other questions from council? Seeing none, it's already been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Carried. Correspondence, moved by Councilor Somerville. I need a seconder for, this is the 12.1 correspondence, to be received from MPP Dufferin Caledon, providing a copy of letter sent to the Ministry of the Environment Climate Change. Need a seconder, Councilor Somerville, Councilor Guido. Any questions on this, that correspondence regarding newly released required management plans including wastewater assets be received? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next one, correspondence 6518, which is 12.2, moved by Councilor Somerville. I need a seconder, seconded by Councilor True. Any questions on that? This is the correspondence 6518 regarding participation in Earth Hour on March 24, 2018 be received. No questions, all those in favor? Carried. Next one is moved by Councilor Back, seconded by Councilor Somerville. That corresponds 7118 regarding the request to AMO and FCM to provide user pay childcare services at conferences be received. Questions? All those in favor? Carried. Next is 12.4, seconded by Councilor Somerville. Need a seconder for it. Councilor Watton. Correspondence regarding extending the study area for Greenbelt expansion be received. All those in favor? Carried. Next one is 12.5, correspondence 60-18, Councillor Watton, second by Councillor Somerville, that correspondence 6018 regarding the forest sector and improvements to the Endangered Species Act and requesting the support of Ontario municipalities be received. Questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Is this, did I miss something? What did I miss? Oh, is it? Oh, okay, so it was moved as received, so, okay. So, Councillor Watton, you wanted to amend it to be received and endorsed? And this is regarding the Endangered Species Act requesting support of Ontario municipalities. Councillor Somerville, are you okay with that amendment? All right, any questions on that? So it's the same as recommended, but it's receive and endorse. Okay, all those in favor? Carried. Now, am I missing anything? Notice of motions, none. Closed session, none. Motion adjourned, moved by Councillor Guido. You were way off tonight. Second by Councillor Watton. Meeting be adjourned. Recorded vote, questions, all those in favor? Carried.